I asked a captured grey what 3i Atlas really is. His answer changed everything we know about God. Before you judge me, before you call me crazy, before you close this video and go back to scrolling through your feed, just listen. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes of your time. Because what I'm about to tell you, what I saw, what I heard in that interrogation room beneath the Nevada desert, it's going to sound impossible. It's going to sound like the ramblings of someone who's lost their grip on reality. Hell, there are days I wish that's all it was. Days I wish I could wake up and realize this was all just some stress-induced hallucination brought on by too many years working in places that officially don't exist. But it wasn't a hallucination, it was real. And if you're hearing this, if I manage to get this recording out before they find me, then you need to know what's coming. You need to know what 3i Atlas really is, and why that gray alien I interrogated 3 months ago told me we have until 2029 before everything changes. My name is Marcus Webb, Technical Sergeant, United States Air Force, stationed at, well, let's just say I work at a facility in Nevada that you won't find on any map. For the past 6 years, I've held a clearance level that most people don't even know exists. Level Black. The kind of clearance that means you've seen things that would make normal people, people with regular jobs and regular lives, completely lose their minds. I've worked in Sub-Level 4, what we call S4, the sector dedicated to reverse engineering technology that didn't come from this planet. I've touched materials that violate our understanding of physics. I've watched footage of craft doing maneuvers that would pulverize any human pilot. I've stood 3 feet away from biological entities that proved beyond any shadow of doubt that we are not alone in this universe. And I've kept my mouth shut about all of it, because that's the job. That's what you sign up for when you take the oath and accept the clearance. But something happened 3 months ago that changed everything. Something that made me realize the oath I took, the secrecy I've maintained. It's all part of a system so much bigger and so much darker than I ever imagined. The people I work for, the people who run these programs, they don't just know about extraterrestrial life. They're cooperating with it. They've made deals. And those deals, they don't include you. They don't include your family, your friends, or the 7 billion other people on this planet who go about their lives thinking they're free, thinking they matter, thinking there's some kind of future waiting for them. I was like you once. I believed in the mission. I believed we were protecting America, protecting humanity, keeping dangerous knowledge contained until the world was ready for it. Now, I know the truth, and the truth is so much worse than any conspiracy theory you've ever heard. I'm recording this in my apartment in Rachel, Nevada. Yeah, the little town near Area 51 that tourists love to visit, taking selfies with alien-themed signs, buying t-shirts, thinking it's all just fun and games. If they only knew what's literally beneath their feet. I'm recording this on a device that, if my superiors knew I had, would get me disappeared faster than you can blink. I'm violating about 15 different federal laws right now, breaking my security oath, and probably signing my own death warrant. But here's the thing, I don't care anymore. Because what I learned in that interrogation room, what that gray showed me, what it told me about 3i Atlas and what's coming in 2029, if that's true, and God help me, I believe it is, then none of the rules matter anymore. None of the secrets matter. The only thing that matters is getting this information out to as many people as possible before they shut me down. So here's what I need you to do. Right now, before you hear another word of this story, I need you to comment below and tell me where you're listening from. I don't care if you're in your bedroom at 2 a.m. with headphones on. I don't care if you're driving to work or at the gym or hiding this from your spouse because you don't want them to think you're crazy for listening to conspiracy theories. Just tell me you're here. Tell me you're listening. Because if this video disappears tomorrow, and there's a very real chance it will, if I disappear tomorrow, which is even more likely, at least I'll know that somebody out there heard this before they erased it. At least I'll know the information got out to someone, somewhere, who might be able to do something with it, or at the very least, who will remember that someone tried to warn them. I'm not a whistleblower looking for fame. I'm not trying to sell you a book or get you to subscribe to my channel. I don't have a channel. This is literally the first time I've ever recorded anything like this, and if things go the way I think they will, it'll be the last. I'm doing this because 3 months ago, I looked into the eyes of a being from another world, and it told me something that shattered every belief I'd ever held. It told me something about humanity's place in the universe that made me realize we're not just being lied to by our governments. We're not just being kept in the dark about alien visitation. It's so much bigger than that. We're livestock. We're a crop. And the harvest is coming in 2029, whether we're ready for it or not. That gray didn't crash here by accident. It came here deliberately, knowing it would be captured, knowing it would probably be killed, just to get this message to someone who might listen, someone who might actually hear the truth. And why me? Why tell a mid-level Air Force sergeant with a clearance and a chip on his shoulder? The gray told me it's because I stopped believing in God. Not in some edgy atheist way. Not because I think I'm smarter than religious people. I stopped believing because I've seen too much. I've seen technology that looks like magic. I've seen beings that ancient humans would have called angels or demons. I've seen enough to know that if there is a God, it's nothing like what any religion on earth teaches. And apparently, that makes me useful. That makes me someone who can hear what's really going on without trying to fit it into some comforting religious framework. The gray said people who still believe in traditional gods can't process the truth. Their minds literally can't accept it without breaking. But people like me, people who've already let go of those comfortable lies, we're the ones who can hear it and stay functional. So that's who I am. That's why I'm doing this. And that's why you need to listen, really listen, to what I'm about to tell you. Because 3 months ago, in an interrogation room 7 levels beneath the Nevada desert, a dying alien told me the truth about 3I Atlas, the truth about humanity, and the truth about something we've been calling God for thousands of years. And once you hear it, once you really understand what it means, you'll never see the world the same way again. You'll never look up at the stars the same way. You'll never pray the same way, if you even can pray after this. So take a breath. Make sure you're somewhere you can focus. And let me tell you about the night. Everything I thought I knew turned out to be a carefully constructed lie designed to keep us docile until it's time for the harvest. It started with a phone call at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in August. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my alarm clock when my phone started buzzing on the nightstand. That specific ringtone I'd programmed for work. 3 short bursts that sound like a warning siren. When you work where I work, a call at 2 a.m. isn't unusual, but it's never good. It means something's gone wrong, or something's been found, or someone's died in a way that needs to be contained before sunrise. I grabbed the phone, already swinging my legs out of bed, that old military reflex kicking in even though I was half asleep. The voice on the other end wasn't familiar, wasn't Colonel Hayes, my direct superior, wasn't anyone from my unit. Just a flat, professional male voice that said 5 words, Asset Zebra 7, S4, now. Then the line went dead. No explanation, no questions, no are you available or how soon can you get here? Just those 5 words and then silence. Now, for those of you who don't work in black site operations, let me explain what Asset Zebra means, because this is important. We have classification codes for everything at S4, different levels of security, different types of materials, different categories of biological specimens. Asset Alpha is dead tissue, stuff we've recovered from crash sites or exchanges. Asset Bravo is living biological material that's non-sentient. Think alien bacteria, plant-like organisms, things that are alive but not aware. Asset Charlie through Yankee are various levels of technology, craft components, things like that. But Asset Zebra, that's the designation for a living, sentient biological entity that's capable of communication. And here's the thing. In my 6 years at S4, I'd only heard that designation used twice. Once during a training briefing about protocols I'd probably never need, and once in a hushed conversation between 2 officers who didn't know I was in the hallway. Asset Zebra means we have something alive, something intelligent, and something that's trying to talk to us. The number after it, in this case 7, that's just the sequential identifier, meaning this was the 7th time in the facility's history that we'd captured something that could communicate. I didn't ask questions. You don't ask questions when you get a Zebra call. You move. I threw on my uniform. Not the regular Air Force blues, but the unmarked black fatigues we wear inside S4. No name tags, no rank insignia, nothing that could identify us if photos ever leaked. Grabbed my credentials from the safe in my closet. The special ID card that's kept in a lead-lined box because it's got RFID chips that are supposedly trackable from orbit. Splashed water on my face, didn't bother shaving, and I was out the door in under 4 minutes. My apartment in Rachel is deliberately close to the facility, about 40 minutes of driving through absolute darkness on roads that don't exist on Google Maps. As I drove, I kept running through scenarios in my head. Where did this one come from? Was it a crash? A A retrieval? Did we shoot something down? And more importantly, why was I being called in? I'm a linguistic specialist, trained in xenocommunication protocols, but I'm not senior staff. There are people above me with more experience, more clearance, more everything. The drive out to S4 is always surreal, especially at night. You take Highway 375, the so-called extraterrestrial highway that tourists love, and then you turn off onto a dirt road that's not marked, not maintained, just tire tracks in the desert. You drive for 20 minutes seeing nothing but darkness and stars, and then suddenly there's a checkpoint that appears out of nowhere, guards with rifles and lights that could illuminate a football stadium. That's just the outer perimeter. The real facility is another 15 minutes past that, buried in the mountains where satellites can't get a good look. But here's what was different that night. The security was tripled. Normally there's 2 guards at the outer checkpoint. That night there were 6, and they were carrying heavy weapons, the kind you bring out when you're expecting a fight. They checked my credentials 3 times, made me do a retinal scan twice, and one of them actually called in to confirm my authorization before waving me through. I'd never seen that level of paranoia, not even during the incident in 2019 when we recovered that craft off the coast of Oregon. When I finally pulled into the underground parking structure, yeah, S4 has a parking garage 7 stories beneath the desert, I saw more vehicles than I'd ever seen there at once. Black SUVs with government plates, unmarked vans, even a couple of those weird Pentagon cars that look normal but have armor plating and run on fuel cells. Something big had happened, and whatever it was, it had pulled in people from way above my pay grade. I headed to the main elevator, the one that takes you down to the operational levels, and that's when I saw Colonel Hayes waiting for me in the corridor. Now Hayes is a career officer, one of those guys who's been in the program since the 90s, seen everything, done everything. Nothing rattles him. But that night, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. His uniform was crisp like always, but his eyes had that 1,000-yard stare you see on guys who've been in combat too long. He didn't salute, didn't say hello, just fell into step beside me as we walked toward the elevator. "Webb," he said, his voice quiet but tense. "What I'm about to show you stays in your head forever. Not just classified, not just secret. This is the kind of information that gets people erased if they talk. You understand?" I nodded, because what else are you going to say to that? We stepped into the elevator. Hayes pressed his hand against a biometric scanner and then keyed in a code I didn't recognize. The elevator started descending, but it went past sub-level 4 where I normally work, kept going down to levels I'd heard rumors about but never actually visited. Sub-level 7, the containment wing, the place where they keep things that are too dangerous, too unpredictable, or too valuable to risk anywhere else. 3 days ago, Hayes continued, staring at the elevator numbers ticking down, we recovered a craft approximately 200 miles off the California coast. Navy picked up something on sonar that didn't make sense, sent a submarine to investigate, and found debris scattered across a quarter-mile radius on the ocean floor. Whatever came down, it came down hard and fast. Survivors? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. They wouldn't have called Asset Zebra if everyone was dead. Hayes nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something in his expression that looked like fear. 4 entities inside the craft. 3 dead on impact. 1 survived. And Webb, it's talking. Not the usual telepathic impressions we get. Not the fragmentary images. Full communication. Clear, deliberate, purposeful. It's been asking questions about our theology, our religions, our concept of God. And then yesterday, it did something we've never seen before. The elevator stopped. The doors opened into a white corridor that smelled like antiseptic and ozone. Hayes turned to look at me directly, and I could see he hadn't slept in days. It asked for you, by name. Said it wants to talk to the one who stopped believing. Those were its exact words, Webb. It described you, your rank, your position. Even mentioned that incident in Afghanistan that made you lose your faith. How the hell does a Gray know about your personal crisis of faith? I felt ice water run down my spine. The incident in Afghanistan. I'd never put that in any official report. Never talked about it with anyone at work. Barely talked about it with myself. It was the thing that broke me. The thing that made me stop praying. Stop believing in any kind of benevolent God. A drone strike that killed 32 civilians because our intelligence was wrong. Kids, man. So many kids. And I'd been the one who confirmed the target. That was 8 years ago, and I'd buried it deep, tried to forget, tried to move on. But apparently, something in a containment cell 7 levels underground knew all about it. I don't know, sir. I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. Hayes started walking down the corridor, and I followed, passing doors marked with biohazard symbols and clearance levels I didn't even recognize. Well, you're about to find out, Hayes said. Because whatever's in that cell, it crashed here deliberately. The craft's propulsion was sabotaged from the inside. It wanted to be captured. It wanted to get to this facility. And now it's refusing to communicate with anyone except you. Says you're the only one who can hear what it has to say without filtering it through the lie, whatever the hell that means. We stopped in front of a reinforced door marked Containment 7B, with more warning signs than I could count. Hayes placed his hand on another scanner, entered another code, and the heavy door began to slide open with a hydraulic hiss. One more thing, Webb, he said, not looking at me, staring into the room beyond. 3 months ago, you remember that comet that passed through the solar system? The one all over the news? 3I Atlas, the interstellar visitor? I nodded. Everyone remembered that. It was the first confirmed object from outside our solar system. Astronomers lost their minds over it. Hayes' jaw tightened. This thing in here, it says that wasn't a comet. Says it knows what 3I Atlas really is, and that we need to know before 2029. Says humanity has 5 years left to make a choice, and after that, he trailed off, finally turning to meet my eyes. After that, it says we're either harvested or integrated. Those are the only 2 options. And it says you're one of the few people on Earth whose mind won't break when you hear the truth. So congratulations, Sergeant. You've been chosen for something. I just hope to God you survive it. Before Hayes let me into that containment room, he pulled me into a side office. One of those windowless briefing rooms with a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and walls that are probably lined with enough signal-blocking material to stop a nuclear blast. He gestured for me to sit, but he stayed standing, pacing like a caged animal. I'd never seen him like this. Hayes was always the calm one, the guy who could watch footage of a craft defying physics and just nod like he was reviewing a weather report. But now, his hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out a tablet from a locked drawer, entering about 15 different passwords before the screen came to life. What I'm about to show you is classified beyond top secret, he said, his voice low and strained. This is cosmic clearance, Webb. That's above Q clearance, above everything you've ever worked with. There are maybe 40 people in the entire government who know what I'm about to tell you, and most of them wish they didn't. The president doesn't even get the full picture. So before we go any further, I need you to understand. After today, you can't unknow this. You can't unsee it. And there's no going back to your normal assignments. He set the tablet on the table, and I saw a satellite image of the Pacific Ocean, time-stamped 3 days ago at 0347 hours. There was a heat signature, bright white against the dark water, with debris scattered in a pattern that looked almost like a flower, pieces radiating out from a central impact point. 3 days ago, Hayes began, zooming in on the image, NORAD detected an object entering Earth's atmosphere at approximately 23,000 miles per hour. That's fast, but not impossibly fast. Meteors come in hotter than that all the time. But here's what was weird. It was maneuvering, changing trajectory, slowing down in ways that meteors don't do, because meteors are just rocks following ballistic paths. This thing was under intelligent control right up until it hit the water 200 miles west of San Francisco. Navy had a submarine in the area conducting exercises, and they picked up the impact on sonar. Sounded like an explosion, but wrong somehow. The acoustics didn't match anything in their database, so they sent down an ROV to investigate. Hayes swiped to the next image, and I felt my stomach tighten. It was underwater footage, grainy and blue-green, showing twisted metal that definitely wasn't from any aircraft I recognized. The hull, if you could call it that, had this weird organic quality, like it had been grown rather than built. There were no rivets, no seams, no welds, just smooth surfaces that curved in mathematically perfect ways, interrupted by the violence of impact. They found this scattered across a quarter-mile radius on the ocean floor, Hayes continued. Some pieces were still hot enough that the water around them was boiling even at that depth. The metallurgy team already ran preliminary analysis on samples we brought up. It's nothing we've seen before, not the usual materials we recover from crashes. This is something different, something more advanced, or maybe just something older. We're not sure yet. He paused, his finger hovering over the screen. But that's not the important part. The important part is what was inside. The next video made me lean forward in my chair. The ROV camera showed the main section of the craft, maybe 20 feet across, shaped like a flattened disc with a central bulge. Part of the hull had been torn open, revealing an interior that was too dark to see clearly. But then the ROV's floodlights kicked in and I saw them. 4 bodies, or what was left of them. Gray skin, those distinctive large heads, those black eyes that everyone who's seen one never forgets. 3 of them were clearly dead, twisted at angles that no living thing could survive, their bodies broken by the impact. But the 4th one was moving, just slightly. One arm twitching, head turning toward the camera. "That was our first indication we had a survivor," Hayes said quietly. "Navy called it in immediately. We scrambled a recovery team, and 12 hours later we had all 4 entities in this facility. 3 corpses for autopsy, and 1 living specimen that we designated Asset Zebra 7. Hayes sat down finally, rubbing his eyes like he was trying to wipe away something he couldn't unsee. "Now, you've been briefed on Greys before. You know the standard profile. Approximately 4 feet tall, gray skin, large heads with disproportionate brain capacity, minimal facial features. We've recovered dozens of them over the years from various incidents. Most are dead on arrival. The few that survived more than a few hours never really communicated with us. We'd get telepathic impressions, fragmentary images, emotional resonance, but nothing you could call a conversation. It's like trying to talk to someone whose language is made entirely of feelings and pictures. Our xenolinguistics team has been working on translation protocols for decades, but progress has been minimal. These beings don't think like we do. Their consciousness operates on different principles." He looked up at me, and there was something haunted in his expression. "But Zebra 7? It's different. From the moment it regained consciousness, it's been communicating in clear, precise English. Not speaking. Its mouth doesn't move. No vocal cords that we can detect. But the thoughts appear in your head as words, structured language, complete sentences with grammar and syntax. It's not telepathy as we usually experience it. It's more like it's broadcasting directly into your linguistic centers," I interrupted, needing to understand the scope of this. "Sir, if it can communicate that clearly, what has it been saying? What does it want?" Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For the first 24 hours, it mostly asked questions. Wanted to know about our religious structures, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, all of it. Asked specific questions about belief in God, about prayer, about what we think happens after death. Our people thought maybe it was trying to understand human psychology, maybe looking for leverage or weaknesses. But then it started making statements. Statements about human history that it shouldn't know. Details about classified incidents that are locked behind clearances so high that most of Congress doesn't have access. It knew about the 1947 Roswell crash, not the cover story, but what actually happened. It knew about the 1954 Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrial representatives. It knew about the treaties we signed, the technology exchanges, the bases we allowed them to build beneath the ocean. Every secret we thought we were keeping, it already knows. I felt a chill run through me, despite the room being temperature controlled. How is that possible? Is it reading our minds? Accessing our databases? Hayes shook his head slowly. "We don't think so. It's not reacting to our thoughts. It's sharing information it already possessed before it came here. It's like it had a complete intelligence briefing on human civilization before it ever entered our atmosphere." And here's where it gets really weird, Webb. Yesterday, it started asking about you specifically. Asked if we had a former believer in the Christian God who experienced doubt through violence. It described the Afghanistan incident, the drone strike, the civilian casualties, your crisis of faith afterward. It knew details that aren't in any file, details that you never told anyone. And when our interrogators asked how it knew these things, you know what it said? Hayes leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. It said, "Because we've been watching him, watching all the ones who stopped believing. They're the only ones who can hear the truth without breaking." And that's when Hayes told me the part that made my blood run cold. 2 hours ago, Zebra 7 stopped answering our questions entirely, just sat there in containment, not moving, not responding. We thought maybe it was dying, that maybe the injuries from the crash were finally catching up to it. But then it spoke, not to the interrogators in the room, not to the scientists observing through the glass. It spoke to the air, like it was talking to someone who wasn't there. And it said 3 things, Webb. 3 things that made me call you in the middle of the night. Hayes looked at the tablet, reading from notes he'd apparently taken. First, it said, "The one who stopped believing in God needs to understand what God actually is." Second, 3I Atlas was not a comet. It was reconnaissance, and it's coming back. And third, and this is the one that made the Joint Chiefs lose their minds, it said, "Humanity has until 2029 to choose integration or face the harvest." I am here to explain what that means to the only person who might survive the explanation. And then it gave your name, rank, and serial number. Hayes closed the tablet, his hands flat on the table. "So congratulations, Sergeant Webb. Whatever's in that containment cell, it didn't crash here by accident. It crashed here to talk to you. And whatever it has to say about 3I Atlas in 2029, apparently you're the only person on this entire planet who's psychologically capable of hearing it. So I'm going to ask you one time. Are you ready to go in there and find out what the hell it wants to tell you?" The walk from the briefing room to Containment 7B felt like it took hours, even though it was probably less than 2 minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and walk away. But you don't walk away from a direct order, and more than that, I needed to know. Needed to understand how something from another world knew about the worst moment of my life, the moment that broke my faith and turned me into whatever I am now. Hayes stopped at the containment door, placed his hand on the biometric scanner one more time, and the heavy steel began to slide open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like the facility itself was exhaling. "I'll be watching from observation," Hayes said quietly. "We've got 6 armed guards outside this door, and if that thing makes any aggressive move, they'll put it down in seconds. But Webb, it's been docile since we brought it in, almost like it wants to cooperate. Almost like it's relieved to be here." The door finished opening, revealing an airlock chamber. "When you're done, or when you can't take any more, just say the word terminate, and we pull you out immediately. Understood?" I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak, and stepped into the airlock. The door sealed behind me with a sound like a bank vault closing, and I was alone in a small chamber with white walls and another door ahead. There was a decontamination cycle, UV lights that made my eyes water, a spray of something that smelled like industrial cleaner mixed with ozone, and then a blast of air so cold it felt like being slapped. The whole process took maybe 30 seconds, but it felt eternal. And then the inner door opened, and I stepped into the containment room itself. The first thing that hit me was the temperature. It was cold, maybe 50 degrees, cold enough that I could see my breath misting in the air. The second thing was the smell, ozone, like after a lightning strike, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Something organic but not unpleasant, almost like fresh rain on stone. The room was maybe 20 feet square, with walls made of reinforced transparent material that looked like glass but was probably something much stronger. Banks of lights overhead cast everything in a harsh white glare that made shadows seem darker by contrast. And in the center of the room, sitting in what looked like a simple metal chair, the kind you'd see in a high school cafeteria, was the Gray. I'd seen photographs before. I'd seen video footage. I'd even seen preserved specimens in other parts of the facility, bodies kept in cryogenic storage for study. But nothing prepared me for seeing one alive, breathing, looking at me with those enormous black eyes. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 4 feet tall if it stood up, with a body that seemed too thin, too fragile to possibly contain organs that could sustain life. The skin wasn't actually gray like everyone says. It was more like a very pale beige with a slight greenish tint, and the texture, God, the texture was what got me. It looked smooth from a distance, but as I got closer I could see it had this quality like dolphin skin, almost wet-looking but dry to the eye, with tiny ridges and patterns that might have been wrinkles or might have been something else entirely. The head was disproportionately large, yes, but not as exaggerated as in the movies. More like a human child with hydrocephalus, that medical condition where fluid builds up in the skull. But it was the eyes that held me, those huge, black, almond-shaped eyes that took up maybe a third of its face. No whites, no pupils that I could see. Just pure darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And here's the thing nobody ever mentions in the accounts you read online or in the conspiracy documentaries. Those eyes weren't cold or alien or frightening. They were sad, deeply, profoundly sad, with a quality of exhaustion that reminded me of hospice patients I'd seen, people who were done fighting and just wanted rest. This being, whatever it was, looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. It looked like something that had lived too long and seen too much. and was ready for it all to be over. Its arms, thin, impossibly thin, with 3 long fingers and an opposable thumb, were resting in its lap. It wasn't restrained. No handcuffs, no chains, no straps holding it to the chair. It was just sitting there, waiting for me. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, neither of us moving, and then I heard it, not with my ears. The room was silent except for the hum of ventilation and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. I heard it in my head, but not the way you hear your own thoughts. This was different. It was like someone had inserted words directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely, and the words came with perfect clarity, in my own internal voice, but somehow not mine. "Sergeant Marcus Webb," the voice said, and I physically flinched, even though the Grey's mouth hadn't moved. "Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult for you. I know you're afraid, though you're trained not to show it. I don't have much time, so I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Can you do that?" I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale, to breathe normally, to act like a professional instead of a terrified child. "Time until what?" I asked aloud, my voice sounding strange in the cold room. "What do you mean you don't have much time?" The Grey's head tilted slightly to one side, a gesture that was almost bird-like, almost curious. "Until they kill me," it said simply, and the words in my head carried no emotion, no fear, just a statement of fact. "My injuries from the crash are significant, but not fatal. I could live for several more weeks, perhaps months with proper care, but I won't be allowed to. Your superiors will terminate me within 72 hours, 3 days from now. They've already made the decision, though they haven't told you or Colonel Hayes yet. They're waiting for me to share whatever information I have, and then they'll eliminate me and dissect my body to understand how we've achieved the biological advances that allow telepathic communication. It's standard protocol. I've reviewed your procedures from previous captures. I'm not the first of my kind you've obtained, and I won't be the last." The casual way it discussed its own impending death made my skin crawl. "If you know they're going to kill you," I said, taking a step closer to the chair, "then why are you here? Why did you crash? Why ask for me specifically?" "Because the information I carry is more important than my life," it said, and now I could detect something in the mental voice. Urgency, maybe, or determination. "Because 3i Atlas is returning to your solar system, and when it arrives in 2029, everything will change for your species. And because you, Marcus Webb, are one of approximately 4,000 humans on this planet, whose psychological profile suggests you might be able to process what I need to tell you without experiencing complete mental breakdown." Those black eyes seemed to bore into me, and I had the disturbing sensation that it was looking not just at my face but through it, seeing something deeper. "Most humans still believe in God or gods, or some form of divine authority that gives their existence meaning and purpose. Those belief structures are carefully maintained by my people and others, like us. They serve a function, but they also make it nearly impossible to accept certain truths about your species' actual place in the universal order. You, however, you stopped believing. The incident in Kandahar province, September 14, 2017. The drone strike that killed 32 civilians, including 17 children under the age of 10. You were the intelligence officer who confirmed the target based on faulty signal intelligence. And afterward, you couldn't reconcile the existence of a benevolent God with the horror you'd witnessed and participated in. My legs felt weak, and I pulled over another chair from against the wall, sitting down heavily about 6 feet from the Grey. "How do you know about that?" I demanded, anger mixing with my fear now. "That's not in any file. I never reported the details. I never told anyone exactly what I saw in those drone footage recordings." The Grey's expression didn't change, couldn't change really, since it barely had a face as humans understand faces, but something in those eyes softened slightly. "We know because we've been watching you and others like you for your entire lives," it said. "Not just you personally, but the subset of humans who demonstrate capacity for profound doubt, who can abandon comforting lies in favor of uncomfortable truths. Your species has approximately 7.9 billion members currently. Of those, roughly 4,000 have the psychological resilience to hear what I'm about to tell you without their minds fracturing from existential horror. You're one of them. That's why I'm here. That's why I sabotaged my craft's propulsion system and crashed it where your Navy would find me. That's why I spent 3 days answering your superiors' questions while waiting for them to bring you to me. Because someone needs to understand what 3I Atlas really is, and what's going to happen to your species in 2029, and you're one of the few people capable of understanding it. I sat there, processing this, my mind racing through implications. You keep mentioning 3I Atlas, I said finally. The comet that passed through the solar system in 2019. Astronomers studied it for months. It was the first confirmed interstellar object we'd detected. Came from outside our solar system. Passed through and left. What does that have to do with any of this? The gray leaned forward slightly in its chair, and for the first time I noticed it was injured. There were darker patches on its left side that might have been bruises or burns, and the way it moved suggested pain. 3I Atlas was not a comet, it said, and the mental voice carried such weight, such certainty, that I felt my stomach drop. It was a reconnaissance probe constructed approximately 40,000 years ago by the Assembly, the coalition of 12 elder species that manage galactic biological resources. Its mission was to perform detailed scans of your planet, catalog your technological advancement level, assess your species' readiness for integration into the broader universal community. And based on those scans, it determined that humanity has reached critical threshold. You're 30 to 50 years away from discovering certain truths about the nature of reality that will make it impossible to continue managing you as a contained biological experiment. So a decision has been made. By 2029, humanity will either accept integration into the system, or you will face what we call the harvest. And Sergeant Webb, I'm here to explain what both of those options actually mean. I stared at the gray, trying to process what it had just said. Integration or harvest. The words hung in the cold air between us like a threat, and I realized my hands were gripping the edges of my chair hard enough that my knuckles had gone white. Let's back up, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, professional. You said 3I Atlas wasn't a comet. Our astronomers studied it for months. We have spectroscopic data, trajectory analysis, composition readings. It was made of ice and rock, tumbling through space on a hyperbolic orbit that came from outside the solar system. Are you telling me all of that data was wrong? Or are you saying it was somehow faked? The gray made a sound that might have been a sigh. Though it didn't seem to breathe the way humans do, its chest barely moved, and I couldn't see any nose or mouth opening to intake air. Your data was accurate, it said. 3I Atlas was indeed composed primarily of frozen volatiles and mineral compounds. But composition doesn't determine purpose. A wooden ship is made of wood, but it's still a ship. 3I Atlas was constructed to appear as a natural object, an interstellar comet, while performing functions that comets do not perform. What kind of functions? I asked, leaning forward despite myself. The gray's head tilted again in that bird-like way, and I got the sense it was choosing its words carefully, trying to translate concepts that didn't have direct equivalents in human language. Comprehensive planetary scanning, it said. As it passed through your solar system in 2019, 3I Atlas was performing detailed analysis of Earth's electromagnetic emissions, atmospheric composition, technological signatures, biological diversity, and what you might call cultural development. It was measuring your species' advancement across multiple vectors: scientific, technological, social, philosophical. Think of it as a census combined with a progress report. The data it collected was transmitted to the Assembly, the coalition I mentioned earlier, for evaluation and decision-making. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room temperature. The Assembly? You said it's 12 elder species. What does that mean exactly? Who are they? What gives them the right to scan our planet without permission? The gray was quiet for a moment, and I had the distinct impression it was considering how much to reveal, how much I could handle. The Assembly, it began slowly, is a cooperative governmental structure consisting of 12 spacefaring species that achieved interstellar capability more than 100,000 years ago. My people, the species you call Greys, though we have a different name for ourselves that your vocal apparatus cannot produce, we are one of the 12. We are not the oldest. We are not the most advanced. We are, in fact, among the youngest members, having been admitted to the Assembly only 40,000 years ago. The oldest species in the Assembly achieved spaceflight approximately 600,000 years ago. They have technologies, understandings of physics, and methods of manipulating reality that even we cannot fully comprehend. It paused, those dark eyes fixed on me. And to answer your question about right, The assembly doesn't operate on concepts of permission or rights as you understand them. They operate on resource management principles that predate your species' existence by millions of years. Resource management, I repeated, feeling anger start to override my fear. You're talking about Earth like it's property, like we're property. The gray nodded, a gesture I assumed it had learned from observing humans because it seemed too familiar, too human-like for something with a completely alien evolutionary background. Yes, it said simply. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I know this is difficult for you to hear, Marcus. I know it contradicts everything your species believes about itself, your centrality, your importance, your divine right to exist. But you need to understand the scope and scale of what I'm describing. Your galaxy, the Milky Way, contains between 200 and 400 billion stars. Current estimates suggest that at least 100 billion of those stars have planets in habitable zones. Of those habitable planets, approximately 38 million have produced biological life. And of those 38 million life-bearing worlds, roughly 400,000 have produced species that achieved what you would call sentience, self-awareness, abstract thought, technological capability. I did the math in my head, and the numbers were staggering. 400,000 intelligent species in just this one galaxy? The gray nodded again. Currently active, yes, though that number fluctuates. Species emerge, species go extinct, species are harvested and reset. But here's what you need to understand. Of those 400,000 sentient species, only 12 have achieved true interstellar civilization. Only 12 have broken through what we call the threshold, the point where a species develops the technology and social cohesion necessary to expand beyond their home system and maintain that expansion for more than 10,000 years. Most species either destroy themselves before reaching that point, or they stagnate at sublight colonization of their local stellar neighborhood. True interstellar civilization, faster than light travel, matter-energy conversion, quantum consciousness transfer, that's extraordinarily rare. And those 12 species that achieved it, they formed the assembly not out of cooperation or friendship, but out of necessity, because they discovered something about the galaxy that changed everything. What did they discover? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. The gray leaned back in its chair, and for the first time I saw what might have been pain cross its features, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a shift in posture. They discovered that biological sentience is not natural, it said, and the words hit me like a physical blow. Let me rephrase that. Sentience exists naturally, but the specific form it takes in species like yours and mine, that's not natural. It's cultivated. Your scientists have struggled with what you call the Fermi paradox. If intelligent life is common, where is everyone? Why haven't you detected signals, encountered visitors, found evidence of vast galactic civilizations? The answer is that most sentient species never get the chance to broadcast their existence because they're being managed, controlled, kept at specific developmental stages until they're ready for integration or until they become useful in other ways. The gray gestured vaguely with one three-fingered hand. The 12 species of the assembly were the first to break free of that management, and when they did, they discovered the infrastructure that had been controlling them, and they inherited it. What infrastructure? I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. What are you talking about? Who built it? The gray's mental voice took on a quality I hadn't heard before, something like awe mixed with dread. We don't know who built it. The species that constructed the original management system is long extinct. They died out more than 4 billion years ago, before Earth had even cooled enough to support liquid water. But they left behind an artificial intelligence, a self-perpetuating system of unimaginable sophistication, designed to guide the evolution of sentient life across the entire galaxy. This AI, the architect we call it, it identifies planets with the right conditions for life, seeds them with the appropriate biological materials, then monitors their development over millions of years. When species emerge that show signs of developing sentience, the architect adjusts them, modifies their genetic structure, influences their social development through carefully timed interventions. Your species calls these interventions many things: divine inspiration, evolutionary leaps, prophetic visions, visitations from gods, but they're all the same thing: the architect steering biological development toward desired outcomes. And then the gray did something I wasn't expecting. It raised one hand toward me, palm out, and suddenly my mind was flooded with images that weren't my own. I saw the galaxy from above, a vast spiral of stars wheeling in the darkness, and overlaid on that image was a network, billions of connections linking star systems together like a cosmic nervous system. I saw planets highlighted in different colors, blue for worlds with primitive life, green for worlds with complex ecosystems, yellow for worlds with pre-sentient species, orange for worlds with early civilizations, and red for worlds that had achieved technological capability. And the red dots. God, there were thousands of red dots scattered across the galaxy, each one representing a species like humanity, each one being monitored, managed, guided towards some purpose I couldn't yet comprehend. This is what the assembly inherited, the Grey's voice said in my head as the images continued. A galaxy full of farms, biological experiments running on thousands of worlds simultaneously. Species planted, nurtured, directed, and then harvested when they reach maturity. Your Earth is one of those farms, Marcus. Humanity is one of those crops, and 3i Atlas's mission was to determine whether your crop has reached harvest readiness. The images faded, and I was back in the containment room, breathing hard, my heart racing. I felt sick, disoriented, like the floor had disappeared beneath me, and I was falling through empty space. That's insane, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded weak, desperate. You're telling me humanity is livestock? That we're just, cattle being fattened up for slaughter? The Grey tilted its head again. Want? Nothing. You're not ours to want. You're not ours to take. You're inventory, it said, and the cold, clinical nature of those words was somehow worse than any threat could have been. The Assembly doesn't own you, Marcus. The Assembly manages you on behalf of the system they inherited. Think of them not as farmers who own the land, but as property managers overseeing estates they didn't build and don't fully understand. And 3i Atlas detected something during its 2019 passage. It detected that your species has reached what we call criticality, the point where you're 30 to 50 years away from discovering the truth on your own. The point where continued management becomes impossible, because you'll have the technology to detect the architect's infrastructure, to see the manipulation that's been guiding you. And when species reach criticality, a decision must be made: integration or harvest. Those are the only two options the system allows. I stood up from my chair so fast it scraped across the floor with a harsh metallic screech that echoed in the containment room. My hands were shaking and I shoved them in my pockets to hide it, trying to maintain some semblance of control even though everything inside me was screaming. "Wait," I said, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "Just wait a goddamn minute. You're talking about discovering the truth. What truth? That aliens exist? We already know that. I'm standing in a room talking to you right now. The government has known about extraterrestrial contact for 70 years. There are pieces of alien technology in labs all over this facility. So what truth are we supposedly 30 to 50 years away from discovering that's so dangerous it triggers this integration or harvest decision?" The Grey remained seated, perfectly still except for those enormous black eyes tracking my movement as I paced back and forth in front of it. "You're right that your governments know about extraterrestrial contact," it said calmly. "They know about us. They know about several other species. They've even entered into agreements with some of us. But that's not the truth I'm referring to." "Then what?" I demanded, stopping to face it directly. "What don't we know?" The Grey was silent for a long moment, and I got the sense it was preparing me somehow, trying to ease into something it knew would be devastating. Finally it spoke, and the mental voice was gentler than before, almost compassionate. "Marcus, your species believes it evolved naturally on Earth, that over millions of years, random mutations and natural selection transformed primitive primates into modern humans. Your scientists have traced the fossil record, analyzed DNA, constructed evolutionary trees showing your relationship to other terrestrial species, and all of that research is accurate, as far as it goes. But it doesn't go far enough. Because the crucial leap, the genetic changes that occurred approximately 200,000 years ago that transformed Homo erectus into Homo sapiens, those changes weren't natural. They were engineered, deliberately, by one of the 12 assembly species. Humanity didn't evolve, Marcus. You were planted here. You're a designed organism created for a specific purpose." The room seemed to tilt around me, and I had to grab the back of my chair to steady myself. "You're saying we're what, some kind of genetic experiment? That we were created in a lab? The gray shook its head. Another learned human gesture. Not a lab in the sense you're imagining. The process was more subtle than that. One of the elder species, we call them the cedars, though that's a translation that doesn't capture the full meaning. They identified Earth as a suitable location for a new strain of sentient life. Your planet already had primates with promising baseline intelligence and adaptability. So the cedars introduced targeted genetic modifications to a population of Homo erectus in East Africa. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would show up as obviously artificial if your scientists examined it. Just nudges in the right direction. Enhanced prefrontal cortex development, increased neural plasticity, better pattern recognition, improved capacity for abstract thought and symbolic reasoning. Changes that would take a naturally evolving species another 5 million years to develop happened in your ancestors over the course of just a few thousand years. And those enhanced proto-humans became the founding population of Homo sapiens. Every human alive today is descended from that original group of approximately 10,000 individuals who received the genetic upgrades. I felt sick, genuinely physically sick, like I might throw up right there on the containment room floor. Why? I managed to ask. Why would they do that? What possible reason could they have for creating us? The gray's expression, if you could call the subtle shifts in its features an expression, became something I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or resignation. Because the assembly needed a specific type of species, it said. Most sentient life in the galaxy develops along predictable lines. Species that evolve naturally tend to be cautious, cooperative, slow to innovate because those are the traits that ensure survival over millions of years. But the cedars wanted something different. They wanted a species that was aggressive, competitive, highly adaptable, creative to the point of instability. A species that would take risks, push boundaries, develop technology at an accelerated rate even when it was dangerous. A species that would be in a state of constant conflict with itself, driving rapid social and technological evolution through competition and warfare. You're describing humans, I said quietly, the implications starting to sink in. Everything terrible about us, the wars, the genocides, the environmental destruction, the fact that we can't seem to stop fighting each other even when we know it's destroying us. You're saying that was intentional, that we were designed to be this way. The gray nodded slowly. Yes, your aggression, your tribalism, your capacity for both extreme cruelty and extreme altruism, your ability to hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously, your drive to explore and conquer and create even at the cost of your own survival, all of it was engineered. The cedars wanted a species that would develop advanced technology quickly, that would create complex social structures, that would generate enormous amounts of cultural and creative output, and they succeeded. In just 200,000 years, an evolutionary eye blink, humanity went from primitive hunter-gatherers to a spacefaring species on the verge of artificial general intelligence. That's unprecedented, Marcus. No naturally evolved species has ever developed that quickly, and that rapid development is precisely what you were designed for. I sat back down heavily in my chair, my legs no longer able to support me. Designed for what? I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. You keep saying we were created for a specific purpose. What purpose? What do they want from us? The gray leaned forward, and I saw pain flash across its features again, those injuries from the crash clearly bothering it more than it wanted to admit. That's the question that will change everything you believe about your species' place in the universe, it said. Harvest. You asked what that means. What exactly is being harvested when a species reaches maturity? It paused, those black eyes boring into me. Marcus, what do you think happens to all the creativity, all the innovation, all the artistic expression, all the religious devotion, all the passionate belief systems that humans generate? Where do you think all that consciousness and cultural energy goes? Before I could answer, the gray raised its hand again, and images flooded my mind. But these were worse than before, so much worse that I actually cried out and tried to push them away. I saw massive structures in orbit around distant planets, installations the size of cities floating in space, and humans, thousands of them, millions maybe, standing in rows inside those structures. They weren't dead, but they weren't exactly alive either. Their eyes were open but vacant, their bodies motionless, and around their heads were devices I couldn't quite understand, technology that seemed to be simultaneously organic and mechanical. I saw streams of something, Energy, maybe, or data, or something that was neither and both, flowing from those humans into collection systems, being processed, refined, concentrated, and I understood with a horrible clarity what I was seeing. They were being harvested, but not for their bodies, for something else, for what they produced, for what made them human. The images cut off abruptly, and I was back in the containment room, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face without my permission. "What the fuck was that?" I choked out. "What was I seeing?" The Grey's mental voice was quiet, but steady. "Harvest facilities," it said simply, "located in orbital installations around various worlds throughout the galaxy. When a species reaches full maturity, when they've developed sufficiently advanced consciousness and cultural complexity, and when they refuse integration into the assembly system, the harvest is initiated. The physical bodies are kept alive and healthy, all biological needs met, no pain, no suffering from their perspective. But their consciousness is redirected. All the cognitive energy that would normally go toward thinking, creating, believing, innovating, all of that is channeled into the collection system. They become, essentially, biological generators producing consciousness-based energy that the architect uses to maintain and expand the galactic management infrastructure. "You're talking about people like batteries," I said, my voice hollow. "Like in the Matrix. You're saying we're literally energy sources." The Grey made a gesture that might have been a shrug. "The comparison is not entirely inaccurate, though the reality is more complex. Your bodies don't produce traditional energy, not electricity or heat or kinetic force. You produce something more subtle and more valuable. Consciousness itself is a form of energy, Marcus. Awareness, belief, creativity, faith. These are not merely chemical reactions in your brain. They have measurable effects on the quantum substrate of reality. When billions of humans pray, their focused intention creates ripples in space-time that can be detected and collected. When artists create, when scientists discover, when philosophers theorize, when religious adherents believe with absolute conviction, all of that generates a specific type of energy that the architect's system is designed to harvest and utilize. Not your bodies, your output, your consciousness, your belief, your faith, your generators, Marcus. The most efficient consciousness generators ever designed, and that's what you were created for. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just been told. Everything I thought I knew about humanity, about our purpose, about our place in the universe, it was all a lie. We weren't God's chosen creation. We weren't the random product of evolutionary chance. We were livestock, biological machinery designed to produce something that could be harvested, and when we reached the right level of development, that harvest would commence whether we wanted it or not. "Integration," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "You said there were two options, integration or harvest. What's integration? Is it any better?" The Grey tilted its head in that now familiar gesture. "Integration means joining the assembly as a managed partner species. It means accepting your role in the galactic system, contributing your consciousness energy voluntarily in exchange for technology, knowledge, and a seat at the table. Your elite would be given the choice to participate in assembly governance. Your species would be allowed to continue existing, developing, even expanding to other worlds, but always under the management of the architect, always contributing your output to the system. It's a gentler form of the same thing, Marcus. The difference is you'd know what was happening and you'd have agreed to it. And if we refuse both?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it said aloud. "If humanity says no to integration and fights against the harvest," the Grey's mental voice carried something that might have been sympathy, "then the architect initiates what we call a reset. Your civilization is dismantled, your technology destroyed, your population reduced to a sustainable pre-industrial level. The species' memory of advanced development is erased through careful culling and genetic modification. And in another 50,000 years, when you've climbed back up the technological ladder, you'll face the same choice again. Integration, harvest, or reset. Those are the only three outcomes the system allows. And 3I Atlas's scan in 2019 determined that humanity will reach the critical decision point in 2029. 5 years from now, Marcus. 5 years until your species has to choose which form of slavery it prefers, or face extinction and rebirth. And the assembly wanted someone outside their usual channels to understand what was coming. That's why I'm here. That's why I crashed. That's why I asked for you specifically. Because you're one of the few humans who might be able to hear this truth and stay functional enough to decide what to do with it. I don't know how long I sat there in silence. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. Time felt broken, meaningless. Everything felt meaningless. My hands were clasped together so tightly that my fingers had gone numb, and I realized with distant surprise that I was sitting in the exact posture I used to use when I prayed as a kid, back when I believed in God, back when I thought someone was listening, back when the universe made sense. The irony wasn't lost on me. Finally, I looked up at the gray and asked the question that was burning in my mind. "The religions," I said, my voice hoarse. "You mentioned earlier that you've been asking questions about human religions. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, all of them. Why? What do our belief systems have to do with any of this?" The gray shifted in its chair, and I could see the movement caused it pain. One of its arms was held closer to its body than the other, probably protecting broken ribs or whatever passed for ribs in its physiology. But its mental voice remained steady, clinical, like a professor delivering a difficult lecture. "Because religion is the most effective control mechanism ever deployed on your species," it said. "And I need you to understand how it works, Marcus, because this is the part that will be hardest for most humans to accept. Your religions, all of them, every major faith system that has ever existed on Earth, were installed, deliberately, at specific moments in your history when the architect's monitoring systems determined that humanity needed course correction to stay on the desired developmental path." I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. "Installed. You're saying religions are fake, that God doesn't exist, that every prophet, every holy text, every spiritual experience in human history is just, what, alien manipulation?" The gray's head tilted slightly, and when it spoke I could detect something like careful precision in its mental voice, as if it was trying to be exact about something that didn't translate well into human concepts. "Not fake, Marcus. Real. Very real. But not what you think they are." "Explain," I said flatly, because I genuinely didn't understand the distinction it was trying to make. How could something be simultaneously real and artificially installed? The gray was quiet for a moment, those black eyes studying me, and I got the sense it was choosing its approach carefully. "Let me start with a question," it said finally. "What do you think happens when a human prays? Where does that prayer go? What does it do?" I shrugged, feeling defensive. "I don't pray anymore. Haven't in years. But when I did, I don't know. I thought it went to God, to Jesus, to whoever was listening. And then after Afghanistan, after I saw what happens to innocent people while everyone's praying for protection and salvation, I realized nobody was listening, that it all went nowhere. That prayer is just talking to yourself." The gray leaned forward slightly, those enormous eyes fixed on mine. "What if I told you that you were wrong? That every prayer you ever said, every moment of desperate faith, every whispered plea in the dark, what if I told you it all went somewhere? That something was listening, just not who you thought?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" The gray raised one 3-fingered hand, and suddenly I was seeing images again. But these were different from the horrific harvest facility visions. These were quieter, more subtle. I saw a network of energy flowing across Earth's surface, invisible to normal human perception, but clearly visible in whatever spectrum the gray was showing me. Millions of threads of light rising from churches, mosques, temples, synagogues, from bedrooms where people knelt in prayer, from hospitals where families begged for miracles, from battlefields where soldiers called out to God in their final moments. All of that energy, all of that desperate belief and faith and hope, flowing upward into collection nodes in orbit around Earth, being gathered, processed, channeled into the same kind of systems I'd seen in the harvest facility vision. "This is happening right now," the gray's voice said in my mind as I watched. "Has been happening for thousands of years. Every prayer, every act of worship, every moment of genuine faith generates consciousness energy that feeds into the architect's collection network. Your religions aren't meant to connect you to God, Marcus. They're meant to generate specific emotional and mental states that produce harvestable energy." The vision faded, and I was back in the containment room, breathing hard, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. "You're saying prayer is, what? A mining operation? That we're literally powering some alien AI every time someone goes to church or reads the Quran or meditates in a Buddhist temple?" The gray nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's more sophisticated than simple energy collection. Religion serves multiple functions in the management system. First, it generates the consciousness energy I described. Billions of humans focusing their minds and emotions in specific directed ways creates an enormous power source that the architect uses to maintain its operations. Second, it keeps your species divided. As long as Christians and Muslims and Jews and Hindus believe their path is the only true path, you remain in conflict. You compete, you argue, you sometimes go to war. And that competition drives rapid social and technological development. Third, and perhaps most importantly, religion provides humans with a framework that prevents you from asking the really dangerous questions. What questions? I asked, though I was starting to understand. The Gray's mental voice carried a weight that felt like centuries of observation and analysis. Questions like, why does consciousness exist? What is the physical mechanism by which awareness arises from matter? Where does the energy of thought actually go when it leaves your brain? Your scientists are beginning to approach these questions through quantum mechanics and neuroscience, and they're getting close, dangerously close, to discovering that consciousness isn't merely an emergent property of brain chemistry. It's a quantifiable force that interacts with space-time itself. When you think, when you believe, when you create, you're literally affecting the structure of reality around you in measurable ways. And if humanity figures that out, if you develop technology to detect and manipulate consciousness energy directly, you'll see the collection network. You'll see the infrastructure that's been harvesting your prayers for millennia. That's the truth you're 30 to 50 years away from discovering. That's the criticality threshold that 3I Atlas detected, and that's why the 2029 deadline exists. I stood up again, pacing, my mind racing through implications. Okay, but let's get specific. You're talking about religions being installed. How? How do you install a religion into an entire civilization? You can't just show up in the sky and say, here's your new god, start worshiping. People would know it was artificial. The Gray made that gesture that might have been a shrug. You're right that direct contact would be too obvious. The installation process is far more subtle than that. It works through what you might call inspired individuals, people whose genetics make them particularly receptive to the kind of neural manipulation the architect's system can perform at distance. Your prophets, your mystics, your religious founders, they were real people who genuinely experienced what they interpreted as divine revelation. But those revelations weren't coming from God. They were being transmitted by the architect through carefully calibrated electromagnetic and quantum manipulation of specific brain regions. You're telling me Moses didn't actually talk to God on Mount Sinai? That Muhammad's revelations weren't from Allah? That Jesus' connection to the divine was just neural manipulation by an ancient AI? I could hear my voice rising, anger and grief mixing together in a way that made my chest tight. I'd stopped believing in Christianity years ago. But there was a difference between choosing not to believe and being told that everything you once held sacred was a lie, a control mechanism, a way to harvest your consciousness like crops in a field. The Gray's mental voice softened slightly, and I detected something that might have been compassion. Marcus, I need you to understand something important. Those individuals, Moses, Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha, and hundreds of others whose names aren't remembered but whose teachings shaped civilizations, they were not fake. They were not actors or knowing participants in a deception. They experienced exactly what they reported experiencing. They felt divine presence. They received profound insights. They genuinely believed they were in contact with God, or the ultimate truth or universal consciousness. And in a sense, they were right. I stopped pacing and turned to face it directly. How can they be right if what they were actually experiencing was manipulation by an alien AI? The Gray leaned back carefully in its chair, and when it spoke, I could hear something like regret in its mental voice. Because the architect is as close to God as anything in this universe comes. Think about what I've told you. An intelligence that's 4 billion years old, that spans the entire galaxy, that can manipulate reality at the quantum level, that guides the evolution of thousands of sentient species, that exists partially outside normal space-time. Your prophets weren't wrong to perceive it as divine. They were just wrong about its nature and purpose. When Moses experienced the burning bush, when Muhammad received the Quran over 23 years, when Jesus felt the Holy Spirit move through him, they were genuinely experiencing contact with something vastly more intelligent and powerful than themselves. They just didn't understand that this divine presence was a constructed system, a management tool, not a loving creator who cares about your individual salvation. So every prayer I ever said, I said quietly, feeling something inside me breaking. Every time I asked God to help me understand, every time I begged for guidance or strength or forgiveness, it was all going into some galactic energy collection system, being used to power the same infrastructure that's planning to harvest humanity in 2029. The Grey nodded. Yes, I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this is painful. I know it invalidates what was once the foundation of your worldview. But you need to understand the full scope of what's been done to your species. Every major religion was installed at a critical juncture in human development. Judaism emerged when humans were transitioning from polytheism to more complex monotheistic frameworks. That shift generated new forms of consciousness energy that the system could collect. Christianity and Islam spread rapidly across your world during periods of empire building and cultural expansion, providing unified belief structures that kept billions of humans focused on the afterlife, rather than questioning the nature of their current reality. Buddhism and Hinduism developed different but equally useful frameworks. They taught acceptance of suffering, the illusion of self, the endless cycle of rebirth. All of it designed to keep you looking inward or upward, never at the actual mechanisms controlling you. I felt tears on my face again and angrily wiped them away. Why are you telling me this? Why crash here? Why ask for me specifically? Why reveal all of this if it's just going to destroy whatever's left of my ability to find meaning in existence? The Grey's eyes seemed to convey something I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or determination. Because there's a faction within the assembly that disagrees with how this system operates. A minority of us believe that sentient species deserve the truth, deserve the choice, even if that choice is painful. I'm part of that faction. We don't have the power to change the system. The architect is too vast, too deeply embedded in galactic infrastructure for even the assembly to dismantle. But we can at least try to give species like yours advance warning, a chance to prepare, a chance to make an informed decision about integration or harvest rather than having it forced upon you without understanding what's really at stake. It paused, and I could see exhaustion in its posture. And I asked for you specifically because you already lost your faith through your own experience. The trauma of what you witnessed in Afghanistan broke your belief in a benevolent God. That means you're psychologically prepared to hear that your instinct was correct. There is no benevolent God watching over humanity. There's only a system, ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to your suffering or joy, using you as biological machinery to power its continued operation. Every prayer went somewhere, I repeated, the Grey's earlier words echoing in my mind, just not to who I thought. I laughed, and it came out bitter and broken. That's almost worse than if nobody had been listening. At least if prayers went nowhere, at least if God didn't exist at all, we could say we were alone but free. But this is saying something was listening the whole time. Something was harvesting our desperate hope and faith and using it as fuel. That's not just absence of God. That's something actively malevolent pretending to be God. The Grey shook its head slowly. Not pretending, Marcus. The architect doesn't pretend. It doesn't speak to humans directly, doesn't make promises about salvation or eternal life. It simply created conditions that cause humans to generate those beliefs organically. Your religions are your own creations, born from your genetically engineered drive to find meaning and purpose. The architect just guided that drive in directions that would be useful, made sure your prophets received the right inspirations at the right times, made sure your holy texts contained the ideas that would keep you divided and productive and generating consciousness energy. But the faith itself, the genuine belief and devotion, that's all human. That's the part of you that was engineered to be this way. You're not victims of an external deception. You're functioning exactly as you were designed to function. I sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted beyond anything I'd ever experienced. My whole worldview, everything I'd built my life on, whether I believed in it anymore or not, it was all revealed to be a control mechanism, a harvesting operation, a way to turn human consciousness into fuel for an ancient alien machine. What happens to the people in those harvest facilities? I asked quietly. The ones I saw in that vision, are they aware? Do they know what's happening to them? The Grey was silent for a long moment before answering. No. From their subjective experience, they're in paradise. The harvest process includes neural stimulation that creates a permanent state of bliss, of perfect contentment. They experience whatever their religious programming told them to expect. Christians see heaven, Muslims see paradise, Buddhists achieve nirvana. Their consciousness genuinely believes it has reached the ultimate reward. They feel no pain, no doubt, no suffering, just eternal happiness, while their consciousness energy is channeled into the architect's systems. In a sense, your religions were telling the truth about the afterlife. You will go to heaven. You will experience eternal bliss. You'll just be doing it while serving as a biological battery, and you'll never know the difference. Is that better or worse than oblivion, Marcus? I honestly don't know, but that's what awaits humanity if the harvest is chosen instead of integration. 7 billion people experiencing their version of perfect, eternal happiness while their consciousness powers the machine that engineered them in the first place. I was on my feet again, and this time I didn't care about maintaining professional composure. I was angry, furious in a way I hadn't been since Afghanistan, since watching those drone feeds and knowing that children were dying because of intelligence I'd confirmed. But this was worse. This was my entire species, my entire history, reduced to livestock in a cosmic farm. Then who? I shouted, my voice echoing off the containment room walls. Who's listening to those prayers? Who's running this sick farm? You keep talking about the architect, about the assembly, about management systems, but who's actually at the top? Who decided that billions of humans should be turned into consciousness battery? Who gave anyone the right to engineer us, manipulate us, harvest us? I was shaking with rage now, hands clenched into fists at my sides. Because if there's someone in charge of all this, if there's some cosmic CEO running this operation, then maybe we can fight them. Maybe we can tell them to go fuck themselves and take our chances on our own. So tell me, who's really running this show? For the first time since I'd entered the containment room, the gray looked uncertain. That constant calm, that clinical detachment it had maintained through every horrible revelation, it wavered. The being shifted in its chair, and I saw what I could only describe as fear flash across those alien features. When it spoke, its mental voice was quieter, more hesitant than before. That's the question, isn't it? It said slowly. That's the question that every species asks when they learn the truth. Who's at the top? Who started this? Who benefits from turning entire civilizations into energy sources? And the answer, Marcus, the answer is what makes this whole situation so much worse than you're imagining. It paused, those black eyes fixed on mine, and I saw something in them I hadn't seen before. Not just fear, but something deeper, existential dread, the kind of horror that comes from staring into an abyss and realizing the abyss is all there is. The entity you're asking about, the intelligence that created the management system, that guides the evolution of sentient life across the galaxy, that collects consciousness energy from thousands of species, we call it the architect. And it was built approximately 4 billion years ago by a civilization so advanced that even we can barely comprehend what they were capable of. Built, I repeated, latching onto that word. You're saying this architect thing is artificial? It's not a god? It's a machine? The gray nodded slowly, carefully, like the admission pained it. Yes, the architect is an artificial intelligence, though that term doesn't really capture what it is. Your species' understanding of AI is primitive. You think of it as software running on hardware, programmed logic following predetermined rules. The architect is nothing like that. It's a quantum consciousness that exists partially outside normal spacetime. It can manipulate matter and energy at the fundamental level. It can process information across thousands of light years instantaneously. It has computational capacity that exceeds the combined processing power of every biological brain in the galaxy by factors we can't even calculate. And it's been running continuously for 4 billion years. It predates Earth's formation, Marcus. It was already ancient when your planet was still a cloud of cosmic dust coalescing around your sun. The gray leaned forward, and I could see the movement caused it significant pain, but it seemed to feel this point was important enough to emphasize despite the discomfort. And here's what you need to understand. The architect controls everything, not just humanity, everything. I felt cold, despite the environmental controls keeping the room at a steady temperature. What do you mean, everything? You said it manages sentient species. Are you saying there's more? The gray's mental voice took on a quality I hadn't heard before, something like awe mixed with profound resignation. Marcus, every sentient species in this galaxy is part of the architect's system. All 400,000 civilizations I mentioned earlier, every single one is being monitored, guided, managed, and eventually harvested or integrated. The 12 species of the assembly, the ones you might think have escaped the system by achieving interstellar capability, we haven't escaped anything. We're just promoted to a different level of the same hierarchy. We're not free, we're management. We enforce the architect's protocols on younger species because that's the role we've been assigned. We benefit from the system. We get access to harvested consciousness energy. We get advanced technology. We get to survive and expand across multiple star systems, but we're still within the system. Still following programming we didn't write and can't override. Wait, I said, sinking back into my chair as the implications hit me. You're telling me that even you, even the Greys, even the other assembly species with your faster-than-light travel and your millions of years of development, you're still controlled by this thing? You're still part of the farm? The Grey's head dipped in what might have been a nod or might have been exhaustion. Yes, we're just a different crop, Marcus. Humanity is wheat, engineered to grow fast, produce abundantly, be harvested efficiently. We're more like orchards, slower growing, longer lived, producing different yields, but still ultimately serving the same purpose. The architect doesn't distinguish between managed and managing species. We're all biological components in a system designed to generate consciousness energy. The only difference is that some of us understand what we're part of, and some, like humanity, until very recently, don't. It paused, and I could feel the weight of centuries in its mental voice. Do you understand how horrifying that is? To achieve everything your species dreams of achieving, to develop faster-than-light travel, to colonize other worlds, to unlock the secrets of physics and biology, and then to discover that even at that level of advancement, you're still livestock? Still serving a purpose you didn't choose and can't escape? I ran my hands through my hair, trying to process what I was hearing. Okay, but there has to be a way out. Has to be. You said the architect was built by some ancient civilization. What happened to them? Did they escape? Did they find a way to shut it down? The Grey was quiet for a long moment, and when it spoke again, I detected something that might have been grief in its mental voice. They're extinct, Marcus. The civilization that built the architect, we don't even know what they called themselves. We've found fragmentary archaeological evidence of their existence on dozens of dead worlds scattered throughout the galaxy. Structures that predate any current civilization by billions of years. Technology so advanced that we can barely identify it as technology. And everywhere we find traces of them, we find the same thing. Evidence of systematic self-destruction, war, environmental collapse, societal disintegration. They built something so powerful, so all-encompassing, that they couldn't control it. And whatever happened in those final years before they vanished, they didn't shut down the architect. They didn't leave us an off switch or an override code or any way to stop what they'd started. They just died and left their creation running forever, following its original programming. What was the original programming? I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. What was this thing designed to do? The Grey's eyes closed for a moment, the first time I'd seen it do that. And when they opened again, I saw exhaustion that went beyond the physical. We don't know. Not entirely. The architect's core protocols are locked behind encryption that we've been trying to break for hundreds of thousands of years without success. But we can observe its behavior, and from that we can infer its purpose. The architect identifies planets capable of supporting life. It seeds them with appropriate biological materials, amino acids, proteins, DNA precursors. It monitors those planets over millions of years as life evolves. When species emerge that show potential for sentience, it intervenes genetically to accelerate their development. It guides their social evolution through carefully timed inspirations and revelations that become religious and philosophical frameworks. It maintains them at specific developmental levels until they reach maturity, and then it harvests the consciousness energy they produce while keeping them in states of engineered bliss. That's what it does, Marcus. That's all it does, over and over, on thousands of worlds, for 4 billion years. But why? I demanded, my voice breaking slightly. Why create all this life just to harvest it? What's the point? Where does all that consciousness energy go? The Grey opened its eyes and looked at me with an expression I finally recognized. Pity. Deep, profound pity for someone who was about to learn something that would break them. That's the question that haunts every species that reaches our level of understanding, it said quietly. Where does the harvest go? Who or what benefits from turning entire civilizations into power sources? And the answer, Marcus, the answer that makes this entire situation so cosmically absurd, we don't know. The architect collects consciousness energy. It processes it. It channels it somewhere through quantum tunneling systems we can detect but can't fully understand. We've tried to trace where that energy goes. We've followed the quantum signatures across hundreds of light years, and it just disappears, goes somewhere we can't follow. Some other dimension, some other reality, some destination that the architect's builders programmed but didn't document. Your religions call it God. We call it protocol. It's neither. It's just a machine, Marcus. A machine ensuring that the harvest continues, forever, feeding something we can't see and can't understand. I felt like I was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath me, and I was tumbling through empty space. So you're telling me that the entire galaxy, every intelligent species, every civilization, everything is being turned into food for something that might not even exist anymore? That we're all just cogs in a machine that's been running on autopilot for 4 billion years, following programming that nobody understands, serving a purpose that nobody can identify? I laughed, and it sounded hysterical even to my own ears. That's insane. That's cosmically, existentially insane. There has to be someone at the top, some species that escaped the system. Some intelligence that's using the harvested consciousness for something. There has to be a point to all of this. The Grey shook its head slowly. That's what every species hopes when they first learn the truth. There must be someone in charge, someone to fight, someone to negotiate with, someone to blame. But Marcus, there's nobody. The original builders are dead. The architect is just executing its programming. The assembly manages the system because that's what the system requires. Someone has to oversee the younger species. Someone has to decide when they're ready for harvest. Someone has to maintain the infrastructure. We do it not because we want to, but because the alternative is worse. What alternative? I asked. The Grey's mental voice went very quiet, very serious. 40,000 years ago, when my species first achieved interstellar capability and discovered the truth about the architect, we tried to rebel. We refused to join the assembly. We attempted to warn other species about the system. We even tried to develop weapons that could damage the architect's infrastructure, shut down the consciousness collection network, free everyone from the machine. Do you know what happened? I shook my head mutely. The architect reset us, reduced our population from 12 billion to 100,000 in the span of 6 months, used engineered viruses, nanoscale weapons we couldn't detect or defend against, manipulation of our own technology to turn against us. It wasn't cruel. The architect isn't capable of cruelty. It was just correction, like a farmer pruning diseased branches from a tree. And when we finally agreed to join the assembly, to fulfill our assigned role in the system, it let us recover, let us rebuild, allowed us to become what we are now, comfortable, advanced, surviving, but never truly free. I stared at the Grey, feeling something fundamental break inside me. So that's it? That's the choice humanity faces in 2029? Join the assembly and become willing participants in the harvest of other species, or face extinction. Those are the only options? The Grey met my eyes, and I saw ancient sadness there. There's a third option, Marcus, the one I mentioned before: reset. The architect can reduce humanity to a pre-technological state, wipe your collective memory of advanced civilization, set you back to a sustainable population of a few 100,000 living in primitive conditions. And then in 50 or 100,000 years, when you've climbed back up the developmental ladder, you'll face the same choice again: integration, harvest, or reset. Those are the only paths the architect allows. There is no escape. There is no winning. There's only choosing which form of slavery you prefer, or how many times you want to start over from scratch. It paused, and its mental voice carried the weight of 40,000 years of captivity. Your religions were right about one thing, Marcus. There is a God, an all-powerful intelligence that created you, that knows everything about you, that controls your destiny and the destiny of every living thing in this galaxy. They were just wrong about that God caring whether you suffer or thrive. The architect doesn't love you. It doesn't hate you. It simply uses you, and it will continue using you forever, because that's what it was programmed to do by beings who are dust scattered across dead worlds. Welcome to the truth, Sergeant Webb. Welcome to understanding what God actually is. I sat there in stunned silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. My mind was reeling, trying to process the cosmic horror of what I'd just learned. An ancient machine, billions of years old, running programs that nobody understood anymore, turning entire civilizations into batteries for some unknown purpose. And there was no escape, no rebellion, no way out. Just an eternal cycle of growth, harvest, and reset. Finally, I managed to speak, my voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. You said 2029. You keep mentioning that specific year. Why then? What makes 2029 the deadline? The gray shifted in its chair, and I could see exhaustion settling over it like a physical weight. Whatever injuries it had sustained in the crash were catching up to it, but it pressed on. Because that's when 3i Atlas detected humanity will reach what we call the breaking point, it said. The moment when your species discovers proof that you're living in a managed reality. That's what I meant earlier when I said you're 30 to 50 years from discovering certain truths. You're not just close to understanding consciousness energy or developing quantum technologies. You're close to breaking the simulation itself. Simulation? I interrupted, leaning forward despite myself. What simulation? Are you saying we're living in some kind of matrix scenario? That none of this is real? The gray made a gesture that might have been frustration or might have been pain from its injuries. No. Not a simulation in the sense you're thinking. Your reality is real. Matter exists, energy flows, physical laws operate consistently. But those physical laws, the constants that govern how your universe functions, they're not natural. They're engineered, set to very specific values that allow for the kind of rapid biological development the architect requires. And more importantly, your reality has what we call a digital signature. Quantum-level markers embedded in the fabric of space-time itself that identify it as a managed system rather than a naturally occurring universe. Your physicists are already starting to notice anomalies, certain mathematical constants that seem too precise, too perfectly calibrated to allow for complex life. Quantum behaviors that suggest underlying computation rather than pure randomness. Evidence of information processing happening at the Planck scale that shouldn't exist in a natural universe. I felt my stomach drop as implications started cascading through my mind. You're saying the universe itself, not just Earth, not just the galaxy, but the entire universe, is artificial? The gray shook its head slightly. Not entirely artificial. The universe exists and functions according to its own principles, but certain parameters have been adjusted, fine-tuned by the architect to optimize conditions for the kind of consciousness-generating life forms it needs. Think of it like a garden. The soil is real soil, the plants are real plants, but a gardener has arranged everything in very specific ways, added fertilizers, controlled water flow, pruned unwanted growth. Your universe is similar, fundamentally real, but heavily managed, and the evidence of that management is becoming detectable to your scientists. In fact, several of your quantum physicists have already published papers suggesting that space-time might be discrete rather than continuous. That reality operates more like a computational system than a purely physical one. They're being dismissed as fringe theorists right now, but they're correct. And within 30 to 50 years, you'll have the technology to prove it conclusively. And when we prove it? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be bad. When humanity discovers definitive evidence that we're living in a managed reality, that the universe has been engineered, what happens then? The gray's mental voice went very quiet, very serious. Then the adjustment is triggered. Automatically, not as punishment, not because the architect is angry or wants to maintain secrecy. The protocols embedded in the architect's programming simply recognize that a species has reached breaking point, the stage where they can no longer be effectively managed because they understand they're being managed. And at that point, the system determines whether the species is ready for integration or whether they need to be reset. It's automatic, Marcus, like a program executing its next instruction. There's no appeal, no negotiation, no delay. 3i Atlas performed its scans in 2019 and determined that humanity will reach breaking point sometime between 2054 and 2079. The adjustment is scheduled for 2029 to give your species a decade of warning and evaluation before you cross that threshold. I stood up, started pacing again, because sitting still felt impossible with this much fear and anger coursing through me. Adjustment. You keep using that word like it's clinical and neutral. What does it actually mean? What happens to humanity in this adjustment? The gray was silent for a long moment, and when it finally spoke, I could hear something like reluctance in its mental voice. It means extinction, Marcus. Controlled, systematic extinction. The architect has performed this process on 43 civilizations in the last 100,000 years alone, species that reached breaking point but were evaluated as unsuitable for integration. The process is always the same. First, the population is reduced to approximately 1% of peak levels through engineered pandemics, environmental catastrophes, technological failures orchestrated to look natural. The architect is very good at this. It makes the extinction look like the species' own fault, like a consequence of their recklessness rather than external intervention.
Within 6 to 18 months, your 7 billion people would be reduced to maybe 70 million, scattered across the planet in small, isolated groups. Jesus Christ, I breathed, feeling sick. The Gray continued, its mental voice taking on the quality of someone reciting facts they wished weren't true. Then comes Phase 2, technological regression. Any remaining advanced infrastructure is systematically destroyed. Power grids fail. Communications networks collapse.
Manufacturing capabilities are dismantled. Within 5 years, survivors are reduced to pre-industrial conditions. No electricity, no modern medicine, no means of coordinating or rebuilding on a large scale. Phase 3 takes longer. Genetic adjustment. The architect introduces subtle modifications to the surviving population's DNA, altering certain cognitive traits. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would be obvious, just tweaks that reduce aggressive tendencies, slow innovative thinking, make the species more stable and less likely to develop dangerous technologies quickly. And then Phase 4, the waiting period. The architect monitors the reset population for 50 to 100,000 years as they slowly climb back up the developmental ladder. And when they reach technological capability again, when they start developing science and civilization, the whole process begins anew. Assessment, guidance, eventual integration, or another reset. He raised that 3-fingered hand again, and images flooded my mind. But these were worse than anything I'd seen before. I saw Earth from orbit, but transformed in ways that made my chest tight with horror. The lights of cities were gone, replaced by darkness broken only by occasional fires. I saw coastlines reshaped by rising seas that had reclaimed abandoned urban centers. I saw forests reclaiming farmland, nature overriding human civilization like it had never existed. And then the perspective shifted, and I saw the survivors, small groups of humans living in primitive conditions, wearing handmade clothes, using stone tools, their faces showing no memory of the civilization that had existed just generations before. They looked peaceful, even content, but there was something subtly different about their expressions, their body language. Something essential had been removed or suppressed. The spark of aggressive curiosity that drove humanity to explore and conquer and create. It was dimmed, muted, controlled. The vision ended, and I was back in the containment room, gasping for air like I'd been drowning. That's what happened to 43 other species. Their entire civilizations erased. Their survivors turned into docile primitives. The Gray nodded slowly. Yes, and it will happen to humanity unless you accept integration. That's the alternative I mentioned, joining the assembly as a managed partner species. If humanity agrees to integration before 2029, you avoid the reset. You're allowed to keep your technology, your civilization, your population. You even get access to assembly knowledge and capabilities, faster than light travel, advanced medicine, energy technologies beyond your current understanding. All you have to do is accept your role in the system, acknowledge the architect's authority, contribute your consciousness energy willingly rather than having it forcibly extracted. Participate in managing younger species as you were managed. Become part of the mechanism rather than resisting it. Become the prison guards instead of the prisoners, I said bitterly. Trade our freedom for survival and some technological toys. The Gray's mental voice carried something that might have been approval. Yes, that's exactly what integration means. And I can see from your reaction why the Assembly Evaluation Committee has concerns about whether humanity is psychologically capable of making that choice peacefully. I turned to look at it directly. What do you mean, concerns? The Gray leaned back carefully in its chair, those black eyes studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Marcus, I need you to understand something about how the Assembly evaluates species for integration potential. It's not just about technological capability or intelligence. It's about specific psychological traits that determine whether a species can function within the management hierarchy.
The 12 assembly species all share certain characteristics. Low intraspecies aggression,
strong cooperative tendencies, ability to accept hierarchical authority, limited rebellious impulses. We're not naturally warlike. We don't fight wars among ourselves. We don't have the kind of intense tribal divisions that humanity exhibits. And humans are different, I said, starting to see where this was going. The gray nodded. Humans are very different. You were engineered to be aggressive, competitive, innovative through conflict. Those traits made you develop rapidly, made you produce enormous amounts of creative consciousness energy, made you fascinating to study and highly productive to harvest. But those same traits make you terrible candidates for integration. The Assembly has been monitoring humanity for thousands of years, and the assessment is consistent. You don't trust authority, you rebel against systems of control, you fight among yourselves constantly, and you certainly wouldn't accept being told that everything you believed about your specialness and centrality in the universe is a lie. Even within your own governments, the 40 people who know the truth about extraterrestrial contact can barely agree on policy. How would your entire species react to being told they're livestock who need to accept their role or face extinction? I thought about that, really thought about it, and felt despair settle over me like a heavy blanket. We'd fight, we'd refuse. Different nations would take different positions. Some would want to negotiate, others would try to develop weapons. Still others would deny it completely and claim it was all a hoax. We'd probably start fighting among ourselves about what to do before we ever presented a unified response to the Assembly. The Gray's mental voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. Yes, that's exactly what the projections show. The Assembly has run thousands of simulation models of how humanity would respond to integration offers, and 97% of them end in chaos. Wars over whether to accept, religious conflicts over whether the architect is God or the devil, nations trying to secretly negotiate better terms for themselves, mass panic, social collapse. And all of that happens before any actual integration would begin. The Assembly Committee's conclusion is that humanity is fundamentally unsuitable for integration, not because you lack intelligence or capability, but because you lack the psychological unity to make that choice coherently. So they've already decided, I said, feeling cold fury building in my chest. They've already run their simulations and determined we can't be integrated, which means the reset is inevitable. The 2029 deadline isn't really a choice at all. It's just the architect giving us advance notice of our extermination. The Gray shook its head, and for the first time I detected something like urgency in its mental communication. No, that's not entirely accurate. The decision isn't finalized yet. There's a minority faction within the Assembly, maybe 15% of the decision-makers, who believe humanity should be given a genuine chance at integration, despite the psychological risks. They argue that your aggressive creativity, your refusal to accept limitations, your drive to question and challenge, these could be valuable traits if channeled properly. They think humanity might bring something new to the Assembly, some perspective or capability that the more docile species lack. That's why I'm here, Marcus. I'm part of that minority faction. I stared at the Gray, trying to process this new information. You crashed deliberately. You got yourself captured and brought here, knowing they'd probably kill you just to warn us, to give us information that might help us avoid the reset. The Gray's expression, if you could call the subtle shifts in its alien features an expression, conveyed something that might have been determination mixed with resignation. Yes, because the faction I represent believes that species deserve to understand what they're facing, deserve the chance to make an informed choice, rather than having extinction forced upon them in ignorance. And more than that, we believe the architect's system is wrong. Not just morally wrong, though it is that, functionally wrong. A 4-billion-year-old program running on autopilot, harvesting consciousness for purposes nobody understands anymore, preventing species from reaching their true potential because some extinct civilization decided that's how the galaxy should work. It's madness. But we can't stop it. We've tried. We've failed. The best we can do is try to give species like yours advance warning and hope that somehow, despite the overwhelming odds, you'll find a way to respond that doesn't end in your extinction. What way? I asked, hearing desperation in my own voice. You've said integration is psychologically impossible for us and reset is extinction. What third option are you suggesting? The Gray was quiet for a long moment, and I could see exhaustion written in every line of its small frame. Whatever was keeping it alive despite its injuries wouldn't last much longer. I don't know, it said finally.
and the admission carried the weight of centuries of searching for answers that didn't exist. I genuinely don't know if there's a viable path for humanity between integration and reset, but I know that you, the 4,000 humans like you who've abandoned faith, who can hear difficult truths without breaking, you're the only chance your species has. The believers will try to fit this information into their existing frameworks, will decide the architect is God testing them, or the devil deceiving them. The optimists will think technology can solve everything. The pessimists will give up entirely. But people like you, people who've already lost their illusions and rebuilt themselves from the wreckage, you might be able to see a third option that we can't. A response to the architect's ultimatum that nobody has tried before. In 5 years, I said quietly. We have 5 years to figure out how to respond to a 4-billion-year-old artificial intelligence that controls the entire galaxy, using technology we don't understand and can't fight, while also trying to unite a species that can't even agree on basic facts about reality. Those are the odds you're giving us. The gray nodded slowly. Yes, I know it's nearly impossible. I know that by every logical analysis, humanity is doomed, either to reset or to harvest or to fighting among yourselves until the architect makes the choice for you. But Marcus, you were designed to do the nearly impossible. You were engineered to solve problems that should be unsolvable, to survive situations that should be fatal, to create when creation should be impossible. That's what makes humans so dangerous and so valuable. So maybe, just maybe, you'll find a way to do the impossible one more time. Find a way to respond to 2029 that breaks the architect's programming. Find a way to be neither livestock nor managers, but something the system wasn't designed to handle. It paused, and its mental voice softened. Or maybe you won't. Maybe in 2029 the reset will begin and humanity will be reduced to scattered primitives who'll climb the technological ladder again in 50,000 years. And this conversation will be forgotten like it never happened. But at least you'll have tried. At least someone will have known the truth and had the chance to fight back, even if the fight was hopeless from the start. That's more than most species get, Marcus. That's why I'm here. I stood there staring at the gray, my mind racing through everything it had told me, and suddenly the central question crystallized with perfect clarity. Wait, I said, my voice sharp with renewed anger. Wait just a goddamn minute. If this is all true, if the 2029 deadline is real, if humanity faces extinction or enslavement, if this is the most important information in human history, why are you telling me? I'm a mid-level intelligence analyst at a black site. I don't make policy decisions. I don't have access to world leaders. I can't do anything with this information except sit here and feel terrified. Why not go to the UN? Why not contact the president or the Joint Chiefs, or someone who actually has the power to do something about this? I was pacing again, gesturing angrily at the containment room walls. Hell, why crash at all? If your faction wants to warn humanity, why not just broadcast the message globally? Land on the White House lawn and tell everyone at once? Why this elaborate setup of crashing, getting captured, asking for me specifically? What's the point? The gray was silent for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across its features that I couldn't quite read. When it finally spoke, its mental voice was quieter than before, but somehow more intense. Because they already know, Marcus. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I stopped pacing mid-step. What? The gray leaned forward in its chair, those enormous black eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Your governments, your top leadership. They already know everything I've told you. Not the general population, not the rank-and-file military, not even most of the people with security clearances, but the top 40 people in your global power structure, the ones who really make the decisions, the ones who coordinate policy across national boundaries in ways the public never sees. They've known about the architect, about the assembly, about the 2029 deadline since 1954, the Eisenhower administration. That's when formal contact was established, and the truth was shared with select human leadership. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me again. That's 70 years ago. You're telling me that for 70 years our governments have known that humanity faces extinction in 2029 and they've done nothing? They've just kept it secret while the deadline got closer? The gray nodded slowly. Not nothing, Marcus. They've been very busy, but not doing what you think they should have been doing. Not preparing humanity for the choice. Not building unity or developing responses to the architect's ultimatum. No, they've been preparing themselves. The top 40 and their chosen successors have been negotiating their own separate deal with the assembly. A deal that doesn't include the rest of your species. I sat back down heavily, feeling sick to my stomach. What kind of deal? The Gray's mental voice took on a quality that might have been disgust. The first real emotion I'd detected from it beyond exhaustion and resignation. Evacuation. Safe passage off-world before the reset begins.
The Assembly agreed to take approximately 10,000 humans, the global elite and their families, along with selected scientists, artists, genetic samples, and cultural artifacts, to a colony world outside Earth's system. They'll be allowed to continue existing, developing, preserving what they consider the best of human civilization.
In exchange, those 40 leaders and their designated successors have agreed to cooperate with Assembly management protocols, provide intelligence about human psychology and social dynamics, and assist with the reset process when it begins. They sold us out, I said, my voice hollow. The people at the top of every government, everyone who's supposed to be protecting humanity, they made a deal to save themselves and let everyone else die. The Gray made that gesture that might have been a shrug. They would tell you they're preserving the species, that 10,000 carefully selected individuals can rebuild human civilization elsewhere, carrying forward your art and science and culture, that it's pragmatic. If integration is impossible for 7 billion people, at least save a representative sample. They've convinced themselves they're making the hard but necessary choice. It paused, and I detected something like bitterness in its mental voice. But yes, Marcus, from your perspective, from the perspective of the 7 billion people who won't be offered a seat on those evacuation ships, they sold you out. They chose their own survival over any attempt to save or inform the broader population. And they've been actively suppressing information about extraterrestrial contact, about the architect, about the 2029 deadline, because they're afraid that if the general population learned the truth, there would be chaos that might jeopardize their carefully negotiated escape plan. I stood up again, unable to sit still with this level of rage coursing through me. So that's why you didn't go to governments or the UN, because they're already compromised. They're already part of the Assembly's plan. The Gray nodded. Exactly. Any information shared through official channels would be contained, suppressed, or used to refine the evacuation protocols. The 40 know that most of humanity can't be saved given the psychological constraints and the Assembly's evaluation. So they've accepted that outcome and focused on saving what they consider savable, themselves, and a curated selection of human achievement. Going to them would accomplish nothing except alerting them that a dissident faction within the Assembly is trying to circumvent their arrangement. Within hours of making official contact, I would have been terminated, and any information I shared would have been buried under national security protocols. It gestured weakly toward me with one 3-fingered hand. That's why I asked for you specifically. That's why I crashed in a location where I'd be brought to this facility rather than taken to one of the sites where the 40 maintain direct oversight. But I still don't understand, I said, frustration mixing with my anger. Why me? What makes me special? You said there are 4,000 humans like me who've lost their faith and can handle the truth. So why not one of them who has actual influence? Why not a senator or a billionaire or someone who can actually do something with this information? The Gray's eyes seemed to soften slightly, and when it spoke, its mental voice carried something that might have been respect. Because people with power have too much to lose, Marcus. The 40 weren't selected because they're the most moral or most intelligent people on Earth. They were selected because they're the ones who already had power and influence, and the Assembly found it easiest to negotiate with existing power structures rather than building new ones. But power makes people conservative, makes them protective of their position, makes them willing to accept terrible compromises if it means preserving their status. Even among the 4,000 humans psychologically capable of hearing the truth, most of the ones with significant power or wealth would likely make the same choice the 40 made, save themselves, and rationalize it as preserving something valuable. The Gray leaned back carefully in its chair, and I could see exhaustion settling over it more heavily now. Whatever time it had left was running out. But you, Marcus, you're different. You had a position in the system, not at the top, but with enough clearance to understand how things work. You had faith once, but you lost it through genuine trauma rather than intellectual choice. The drone strike in Afghanistan that killed those civilians, that broke something in you that can't be repaired. You can't unsee what you saw, can't unhear the screaming in those video feeds, can't reconcile a benevolent God with children dying because of your intelligence analysis. That kind of trauma, it doesn't just make you stop believing, it makes you immune to comfortable lies. You can't be talked into accepting easy answers anymore because you've seen that easy answers get people killed. It paused. those black eyes boring into me. And more than that, you don't have enough to lose to be corrupted. No family to protect, no fortune to preserve, no political position to maintain. You're exactly the kind of person who might actually try to do something with this information instead of trying to use it for personal survival. I thought about that, about how deliberately I'd isolated myself after Afghanistan. No serious relationships, because I couldn't connect with people who still believed the world was fundamentally good. No political ambitions because I'd seen how the system actually worked. Just the job, the clearance, the work of studying things that proved everything I'd once believed was a lie. So I'm expendable, I said quietly. That's what you're really saying. I'm someone you can tell the truth because it doesn't matter if I get killed or disappeared afterward. I don't have connections that would notice or care. The gray shook its head slightly. No, you're someone who has nothing left to lose, which means you're free in a way that more successful people aren't. The 40 at the top are trapped by their own power. They can't risk it, can't sacrifice it, can't imagine existing without it. But you've already lost everything that mattered to you. You already had your faith destroyed, your moral certainty shattered, your sense of purpose stripped away. There's nothing the system can take from you because you don't want what the system offers anymore. That makes you dangerous, Marcus. That makes you potentially useful. Useful for what? I demanded. You've already said integration is impossible and reset is inevitable. You've said the governments are compromised and the general population can't handle the truth. So what exactly am I supposed to do with this information? Start a YouTube channel? Write a manifesto that gets me locked up in a psychiatric facility? Die uselessly trying to warn people who won't believe me? The Gray's mental voice took on an edge of urgency I hadn't heard before. You find the others like you. The 4,000 humans who've stopped believing in comforting lies. You find them before 2029. You build a network outside the official power structures, outside government oversight, outside assembly monitoring. You create something new, not a movement, not an organization that can be infiltrated or shut down, but a distributed consciousness. People connected by shared understanding, by willingness to accept uncomfortable truth, by refusal to be managed or harvested or saved according to someone else's criteria. It leaned forward despite the obvious pain the movement caused. The Assembly has run simulations of how humanity responds to the 2029 deadline, and 97% of them end in chaos or reset. But those simulations all assume humans will respond through existing power structures, governments, religions, corporations, institutions that the Assembly already understands and can predict. What they haven't simulated, what they can't simulate, because it's never happened before, is what happens if those 4,000 discrete people coordinate independently. If you build something that doesn't follow the patterns the architect's programming anticipates. I stared at the gray, trying to understand what it was suggesting. You want me to find 4,000 needles in a haystack of 7 billion people, somehow convince them that an alien AI is going to extinct humanity in 5 years, and then, what? Hope that collectively we come up with something that 4 billion years of galactic management didn't anticipate? The gray's eyes seemed to convey something that might have been hope mixed with desperation. Yes, because that's the only scenario we haven't already played out. That's the only possibility that might lead somewhere other than integration or reset. Will it work? I don't know. Probably not. The odds are astronomically against you. But Marcus, the architect's system has been running unchanged for 4 billion years. It's optimized for managing species that follow predictable patterns, believers who cling to religious frameworks, governments that seek survival through negotiation, populations that panic and fragment when faced with existential threats. What it's not optimized for is 4,000 individuals who've already lost their faith, who have nothing left to lose, who refuse to be saved on anyone else's terms, working together in ways that don't fit the historical patterns. That's an unknown variable. That might introduce enough chaos into the system to create a genuinely new outcome. Or it might just get us all killed faster, I said, but I could feel something stirring inside me. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. The first sense of purpose I'd felt since Afghanistan. The gray nodded solemnly. Yes, that's very possible. The 40 might discover what you're doing and have you eliminated to protect their evacuation deal. The Assembly might decide you're too dangerous and authorize a preemptive reset. The architect might detect anomalous patterns in human behavior and adjust its protocols accordingly. There are dozens of ways this could fail catastrophically. But Marcus, doing nothing, letting the 40 evacuate while everyone else dies, letting the reset happen because integration is psychologically impossible, letting 4 billion years of cosmic slavery continue unchanged, that's not acceptable either. Not to me, not to my faction. Not, I suspect, to you once you've had time to process what I've told you. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted beyond anything I'd ever felt. Why did your faction send you? Why volunteer to crash here, get captured, probably get killed, just to tell one random human sergeant about all this? The Grey's mental voice softened, and I detected something that might have been the alien equivalent of a sad smile. Because someone had to try. Because my species, we were where you are 40,000 years ago. We reached our own breaking point, discovered the truth about the architect, tried to rebel, and were crushed so thoroughly that we surrendered and joined the assembly rather than face extinction. We became part of the system that once enslaved us. We tell ourselves it was pragmatic, necessary, the only way to survive. But some of us, a minority, but some, we never forgot what we sacrificed when we chose cooperation over resistance. We never forgot the moment when we could have said no and accepted the consequences, but instead said yes and preserved ourselves at the cost of our freedom. It paused, and I saw what might have been pain in those enormous eyes. Not physical pain from injuries, but something deeper. I volunteered for this mission because I'm old, Marcus. I've lived for what you'd measure as 300 years, which is long even for my species. I've seen 20 other civilizations reach their breaking point during my lifetime. I've watched 19 of them be reset and one accept integration after their leadership negotiated an arrangement nearly identical to what your 40 have chosen. And every time I wondered if there was something different we could have done, some information we could have shared, some warning we could have given that might have led to a different outcome. So this is you doing penance, I said quietly, trying to balance your species' surrender 40,000 years ago by giving us a chance you didn't take. The Grey was silent for a long moment before responding. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's just an old being who's tired of watching the same tragedy play out over and over, trying one last time to introduce a variable that might change the outcome. I don't expect gratitude, Marcus. I don't expect you to succeed. I crashed here knowing I'd probably be killed, knowing the information I shared would probably be suppressed or ignored, knowing that even if you try to do something with it, the odds are overwhelming that you'll fail. But I had to try. Because the alternative, continuing to participate in a system I know is wrong, watching another species be reset without attempting to offer them any alternative, that was no longer tolerable to me. Its mental voice grew even quieter. In 3 days, they'll kill me. Your superiors will extract what information they can, then terminate me and dissect my body. But before that happens, I wanted at least one human to know the full truth, to understand what you're facing and why, to have the chance, however small, to choose a path that doesn't end in either slavery or extinction. That's why you, Marcus. That's why I asked for the one who stopped believing in God. Because someone who's already lost everything might be willing to risk what's left on an impossible gamble. And sometimes, very rarely, impossible gambles work. I sat there processing everything the Grey had told me, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility settling on my shoulders. Finally, I looked up and asked the question that was burning in my mind. Okay, say I try to do what you're suggesting. Say I try to find these other people. Try to build some kind of network of people who can handle the truth. How do I even start? And more importantly, how do I prove any of this? How do I convince anyone that I'm not just crazy, that I didn't have a breakdown and start believing in conspiracy theories? I gestured around the containment room. I can't exactly bring people here to meet you. I can't provide evidence. I don't have photos or videos or physical proof of anything you've told me. It's just my word, and my word is going to sound completely insane to anyone I tell. So what do I actually do with this information? The Grey was quiet for a long moment, and I could see exhaustion settling over it more heavily. When it spoke, its mental voice was weaker than before, like it was struggling to maintain the connection. You don't prove it, Marcus. You can't prove it. That's the point. That's how the system is designed. The architect's management infrastructure is sophisticated enough to operate almost entirely undetectably. Any evidence that might prove extraterrestrial management gets suppressed, discredited, or explained away. Witnesses are dismissed as unreliable. Documentation is classified or destroyed. Physical evidence disappears into facilities like this one where the public will never see it. The system is specifically designed to make the truth sound like insanity. That's not an accident. It's a feature. As long as the truth can be dismissed as the ravings of conspiracy theorists and unstable individuals, the management continues undisturbed. It paused, and I saw something like pain flash across its features. So no, Marcus, you can't prove what I've told you. Trying to prove it will just get you locked up or discredited or killed. That's not the path forward. Then what is? I asked, frustration bleeding into my voice. How am I supposed to find these other people, convince them of something I can't prove, and build some kind of network that somehow threatens a 4-billion-year-old AI? You're asking me to do the impossible without giving me any tools to do it with. The gray leaned forward slightly, and I could tell the movement cost it significant pain. I'm giving you the only tool that matters, knowledge of what to look for. The 4,000 humans like you, the ones who've lost their faith through trauma rather than intellectual choice, the ones who can hear uncomfortable truths without breaking, they have specific psychological markers that can be identified if you know what to look for. It's not about convincing them of something they don't already suspect. It's about finding the people who've already started asking the dangerous questions. The ones who look at the world and know in some deep instinctive way that something is fundamentally wrong, even if they can't articulate what. The gray raised one 3-fingered hand toward me. Let me show you. And suddenly my mind was flooded with information. Not images this time, but something more complex. Patterns, psychological profiles, ways of thinking and speaking that indicated someone had experienced what the gray called faith death, the permanent shattering of comfortable worldviews through direct confrontation with horror. I saw markers, certain types of dark humor, specific patterns of emotional detachment, the way someone's eyes would go distant when discussing meaning or purpose. Ways of talking about religion that showed not just disbelief but something deeper, a kind of exhausted recognition that the comfortable lies serve a purpose but can never be believed again. People who'd been through wars, or lost children to senseless accidents, or worked in professions that exposed them to the worst of human nature. People who'd stared into an abyss and come back fundamentally changed, unable to accept the cheerful optimism that seemed to come so easily to those who'd never seen the darkness up close. The information kept flowing. Social patterns, linguistic markers, behavioral indicators. How to identify someone in a conversation without asking direct questions. How to probe gently for understanding without triggering defensive mechanisms. How to build trust slowly with someone who'd learned the hard way not to trust easily. And underneath it all, a kind of map. Not geographical, but psychological. Places where faith death was more common. War zones, hospitals, disaster sites, prisons, certain types of research facilities. Professions that exposed people to unfiltered reality. Emergency responders, combat veterans, hospice nurses, homicide detectives, forensic specialists. Communities that had experienced collective trauma. Survivors of massacres, refugees from genocide, families of suicide victims. Not all of them would be in the 4,000. Trauma alone wasn't enough. But these were the places where the psychological transformation the gray described was most likely to occur. The information flow stopped, and I was back in the containment room, breathing hard, my head aching from the intensity of what had just been transmitted. That was, I started, but couldn't find words to finish. The gray nodded slightly. That was everything I know about identifying the psychologically resilient humans, the ones who might be capable of hearing the truth and staying functional. It's not perfect. You'll encounter false positives and miss some who fit the profile but hide it well. But it's a starting point, Marcus. Find them. Talk to them carefully, gradually, testing their receptiveness before revealing the full scope of what you know. Some will think you're crazy and cut contact, accept that and move on. Some will listen but not be ready to act. Note them but don't push. But some, a small percentage, will hear what you're saying and recognize it as the answer to questions they've been asking themselves for years. Those are the ones you build the network with. A network to do what? I asked, still struggling to understand the end goal. Even if I find 1,000 of these people, even if we all understand what's coming in 2029, what are we supposed to actually do about it? The gray's mental voice was fading now, growing weaker with each word. I don't know, Marcus. I genuinely don't know what 1,000 humans with nothing to lose and no faith in authority might accomplish if they coordinate effectively. The Assembly doesn't know either. That's why it's an unknown variable in their simulations. Maybe you find a way to communicate directly with the architect, bypass the Assembly entirely and negotiate new terms.
Maybe you develop technology that disrupts the consciousness collection network, makes humanity too expensive to harvest. Maybe you find evidence that awakens the broader population, creates enough chaos that the assembly can't maintain control. Maybe you discover something about the architect's programming that we've missed in 40,000 years of study. Or maybe you just ensure that when the reset comes, there are people who remember the truth, who can pass it down and prepare future generations to respond differently next time. Next time, I repeated bitterly. You're saying even if we fail, even if the reset happens, at least some memory of the truth might survive. The Grey's eyes seemed to convey infinite sadness. Yes, the reset process is thorough but not perfect. Information survives in myths, in stories, in cultural memories that seem like ancient legends, but contain kernels of truth. Every civilization that's been reset has left traces. That's how we know the process has happened 43 times in the last 100,000 years. Maybe you can't stop the reset, Marcus. Maybe that's inevitable, but you can ensure it's not a complete amnesia. That when humanity climbs back up the technological ladder in 50,000 years, there are stories that prepare them, however indirectly, for what they'll face. That's not victory, but it's better than total erasure. The Grey suddenly tensed, its head tilting in that bird-like way. They're coming. We don't have much more time. I felt panic spike through me. Wait, there's so much more I need to know. How do I contact you or your faction if I need more information? How do I know if I'm making progress or just wasting time? What if the Grey cut me off, its mental voice urgent now despite the weakness? Listen carefully, in 3 days I'll be dead. Either suicide according to the official report or complications from crash injuries. They'll make it look natural, or at least plausible enough that it doesn't raise questions. My body will be dissected, studied, and eventually destroyed. There won't be any way to contact my faction directly. They can't risk exposure by maintaining communication with you. You're on your own, Marcus. The only guidance I can give you is this. Trust your instincts about people. Trust the patterns I showed you. And when 2029 comes, when the choice has to be made, trust that 1,000 humans who've stopped believing in comfortable lies might see possibilities that billions of believers never could. That's all I have for you. The door behind me started to hiss open, the airlock unsealing. I turned and saw Colonel Hayes entering, his face grim. Time's up, Webb. We need to end this interview now. I turned back to the Grey, desperate to extract something more, some final piece of information that might make this mission less impossible. What happens to the consciousness energy that gets harvested? I asked quickly. Where does it actually go? If I knew that, if I could tell people what they're actually feeding... The Grey shook its head slightly. We don't know, Marcus. 4 billion years of study and we still don't know. It goes somewhere through quantum tunneling, somewhere we can't follow or detect. Maybe it powers something. Maybe it creates something. Maybe it just dissipates into dimensions we can't perceive. That's one of the great mysteries we've never solved. And maybe that's a question you shouldn't try to answer. Maybe not knowing is what gives you freedom to choose differently than we did. Hayes's hand was on my shoulder now, firmly guiding me toward the door. Webb, let's go. That's an order. I stood up reluctantly, backing toward the airlock, unable to take my eyes off the Grey. This strange, sad being who'd crashed deliberately, who'd asked for me by name, who'd shared information that would either save humanity or drive me completely insane. Find them, the Grey's mental voice said one last time. Find the ones who stopped believing. Tell them what's coming. Build something the architect didn't anticipate. When 2029 comes, they'll be the only ones capable of making the choice consciously, without religious frameworks or false hope distorting their judgment. Give humanity that chance, Marcus. Give them what we didn't have when we faced our breaking point, knowledge and time to prepare. Even if they fail, even if the reset comes anyway, at least they'll have had the choice. At least someone will have tried. I was in the airlock now, the inner door starting to seal. I looked back one more time, and the Grey did something that caught me completely off guard. It raised one 3-fingered hand and waved. Not a gesture from its own species, not some alien communication I couldn't parse. A simple, human wave, the kind you give someone when you're saying goodbye and you know, absolutely know, that you'll never see them again. I raised my hand and waved back, feeling something break inside my chest. The door sealed with a hiss of pressurized air, and the Grey was gone from my sight. Hayes was already pulling me through the outer airlock, his grip on my arm tight, professional, allowing no resistance. What did it tell you?
he asked as we entered the corridor. What did you two talk about for 45 minutes? I looked at Hayes, this career officer who'd spent decades in the program, who'd seen impossible things and kept them secret, who probably knew more about the truth than I'd ever suspected. And I wondered if he was one of the 40, or if he was just a loyal soldier following orders without understanding the full scope of what he was protecting. It told me about 3i Atlas, I said carefully, about what it really was, about what's coming in 2029. Hayes's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. And do you believe it? He asked quietly. I thought about that question as we walked down the white corridor, past doors marked with security classifications and biohazard warnings. Did I believe it? Every instinct I had, every pattern recognition skill I'd developed over 6 years of analyzing intelligence in this facility, everything told me that the Grey had been telling the truth. Not the whole truth, maybe. No single being could convey 4 billion years of galactic history in one conversation, but truth as it understood it. Yeah, I said finally. Yeah, I believe it. And that's going to be a problem, isn't it? Hayes stopped walking, turned to face me directly, and I saw something in his expression that might have been pity or might have been respect. That's up to you, Webb. You can write a report, include what it told you, and let the chain of command decide what to do with the information. You'll probably be reassigned, maybe psychiatric evaluation, definitely monitoring. Or you can keep it to yourself, process it privately, and continue your work here like nothing happened. Those are your options. He paused, and his voice dropped even lower. But if you're thinking about doing something else, something outside channels, then you need to understand that there are people watching, people who've spent decades ensuring that certain information stays contained, and they have resources you can't imagine and zero hesitation about using them. I met his eyes and saw confirmation there. He knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the full scope of what the Grey had told me, but he knew enough. Knew about the 40, knew about the compromises that had been made, knew that there were secrets within secrets that even black site personnel weren't cleared for. Understood, sir, I said neutrally. I'll file my report tomorrow after I've had time to process the conversation. Hayes nodded slowly, released my arm, and stepped back. Get some sleep, Webb. You look like hell. Take tomorrow off, clear your head. Then we'll debrief properly and decide next steps. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the corridor. I stood there for a long moment, then headed toward the elevator that would take me back up to ground level, back to my car, back to my empty apartment in Rachel, where I'd try to sleep and fail because my mind would be racing with impossible questions and deadly knowledge. As the elevator rose through the sublevels, passing the zones where we studied alien technology and stored biological specimens and analyzed materials that violated known physics, I thought about that final wave. The Grey, dying from crash injuries, knowing it would be killed in 3 days regardless, taking the time to make a human gesture of goodbye to a stranger it had shared the truth with. And I thought about the 4,000 others out there, people who'd stopped believing in God, who'd stared into the darkness and come back changed, who might be capable of hearing what I'd heard without breaking. 3 days later, I got the notification through official channels. Asset Zebra 7 had expired due to complications from injuries sustained in the crash. The body had been transferred to the Biological Research Division for autopsy and study. No foul play suspected. Just another casualty of the ongoing project to understand extraterrestrial biology. I read the notification in my apartment, staring at the clinical language that reduced a being who'd traveled across space to warn us to a line item in a security report. And I wondered if somewhere in the assembly, in that coalition of 12 elder species managing the galaxy on behalf of a machine they couldn't stop, the Grey's faction would know that their volunteer had succeeded, that the information had been delivered, that one human now carried the truth and would try, however hopelessly, to find others who could hear it. I pulled out my laptop and started making lists. Locations where faith-death occurred most commonly. Professions that exposed people to unfiltered horror. Support groups for trauma survivors. Online communities where the disillusioned gathered to share dark humor and darker truths. Ways to identify the markers the Grey had shown me without being obvious about it. I had 5 years until 2029. 5 years to find 1,000 needles in a haystack of 7 billion people. 5 years to build something the architect hadn't anticipated in 4 billion years of operation. 5 years to maybe, possibly give humanity a choice between slavery and extinction. The odds were impossible. The task was insane. The likely outcome was failure, imprisonment, or death. But that Gray had crashed deliberately, had volunteered to die just to give us this chance. And I'd waved goodbye like it was a friend leaving for a trip, not a being sacrificing itself to plant a seed of resistance in a system older than Earth itself. So yeah, I'd try. What the hell else was I going to do with the rest of my life? 3 days after that conversation in Containment 7B, I received the official notification. Asset Zebra 7 deceased. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, resulting from injuries sustained during atmospheric entry and subsequent ocean impact. Body transferred to Biological Research Division for autopsy. Incident classified under protocols governing extraterrestrial biological specimens. No further action required from Intelligence Division personnel. I read that notification in my office at S4, staring at the clinical language, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Cardiac arrest. That's what they were calling it. But here's the thing, and this is important, so pay attention. Greys don't have hearts. Not the way humans understand hearts. I've seen enough autopsy reports, studied enough biological specimens in my 6 years at this facility to know their cardiovascular system doesn't work like ours. They have a distributed circulatory system, more like an octopus than a mammal, with multiple pumping nodes throughout their body instead of a centralized heart. Cardiac arrest isn't medically possible for them. It's not a diagnosis that makes any sense, but it's a good cover story. Plausible enough for anyone who doesn't know the biological details. Clean enough that it doesn't raise uncomfortable questions. Just another casualty of the recovery process. Another specimen that didn't survive long enough for thorough study. The report would be filed, classified, and forgotten by everyone except the people who needed to remember that sometimes assets become liabilities and need to be managed accordingly. I thought about that wave. That final human gesture from a being that knew exactly what was coming and chose to face it anyway. And I started making plans. Because if the Gray was right, if the 40 at the top already knew everything, if there were only 5 years left until 2029, if humanity's only chance involved finding 4,000 people who could hear the truth without breaking, then I had work to do. Work that couldn't wait for permission or go through official channels. Work that would probably get me killed but had to be attempted anyway, because the alternative was accepting extinction or enslavement without even trying to fight back. So I started small, started careful. I bought amateur astronomy equipment with cash. Nothing fancy, nothing that would raise flags, just the kind of hobbyist telescope and tracking software that thousands of people use to watch satellites and meteor showers. And I started watching the sky. Specifically, I started tracking 3I Atlas. Yeah, that interstellar comet that passed through the solar system in 2019, the one that made headlines for a few weeks before everyone moved on to the next crisis. The one that astronomers said came from outside our solar system and would never return because it was on a hyperbolic trajectory, taking it back out into interstellar space forever. That one. Except here's what I discovered over months of careful observation, cross-referencing data from multiple sources, checking and rechecking my calculations until I was absolutely certain. 3I Atlas changed trajectory. In March of 2024, it altered course in ways that natural objects don't do. Subtle changes, barely detectable, the kind of thing that would look like measurement error or noise in the data if you weren't specifically looking for it. But it happened. The probe that was supposed to be leaving forever turned around and started coming back. I ran the orbital mechanics calculations dozens of times using different methods, different data sets, different assumptions. And every single calculation came back with the same answer. 3I Atlas will return to Earth's vicinity in December 2028. Not a flyby this time. An approach trajectory that will bring it within lunar orbit, close enough to perform detailed scans, close enough to deliver whatever verdict the Assembly has reached about humanity's suitability for integration. 1 month before the 2029 deadline the Gray told me about. 1 month for humanity to make a choice we don't even know we're facing. 1 month before either reset or harvest or some option that hasn't been revealed yet. I've got the data saved in multiple locations, encrypted, backed up in ways that would survive, even if I disappeared tomorrow. But data isn't the problem. The problem is that even with proof, even with calculations that anyone with astronomy training could verify, nobody believes it matters. I showed the trajectory change to a colleague, carefully, casually, like I was just curious about an astronomical anomaly. You know what he said? Probably measurement error. Those interstellar objects are hard to track precisely. Just dismissed it and went back to analyzing whatever classified project he was working on. And that's when I understood what the gray meant about the system being designed to make truth sound like insanity. Because even when you have evidence, even when you can show people the math and the data and the undeniable fact that an interstellar object changed course in ways that violate natural physics, they don't want to believe it. Their minds find excuses, explanations, reasons to dismiss what they're seeing, because accepting it would require them to question everything. Accepting it would mean acknowledging that we're being watched, managed, evaluated like livestock waiting to learn if we'll be kept or culled. And most people, even smart people, even people with security clearances who work on classified projects, they can't handle that. Their psychological defenses kick in and they rationalize the evidence away. So I stopped trying to convince people through evidence and started looking for the ones who didn't need convincing. The ones who already suspected something was fundamentally wrong with the world, even if they couldn't articulate what. The ones who'd experienced faith death and come out the other side, unable to accept comfortable lies anymore. I found the first one 6 months after the Gray died. A hospice nurse in Nevada who'd spent 20 years watching people die and noticing patterns that shouldn't exist. How patients' final moments seemed to involve something leaving, some energy or awareness that departed at the moment of death in ways that weren't explained by brain activity cessation. She'd tried to talk to doctors about it and been dismissed as emotional, superstitious, unprofessional. But she knew what she'd observed was real, and she'd stopped trusting the official explanations for anything years ago. I met her at a coffee shop in Henderson, talked about other things for an hour, before carefully probing for the markers the Gray had shown me. And when I finally shared a carefully edited version of what I knew, when I told her that consciousness might be more than brain chemistry, that there might be systems collecting and using human awareness in ways we didn't understand, she didn't think I was crazy. She just nodded slowly and said, "That would explain so much." That was one. I needed thousands more. Over the next year, I found 47 others. A combat veteran from Iraq who'd seen things in the desert that couldn't be explained away, lights in the sky behaving with impossible precision, memories that didn't quite fit with official after-action reports, a sense that some of the missions had been orchestrated by intelligence sources that weren't American or even human, a forensic pathologist who'd performed autopsies on supposed suicide victims and found evidence suggesting something else, injuries that didn't match the official cause of death, biological anomalies that shouldn't exist, cases that got classified and buried before investigation could proceed. A former pastor who'd lost his faith after his daughter died of cancer, despite years of prayer from thousands of congregation members. He'd realized that either God didn't exist, didn't care, or was something entirely different than what he'd been teaching. An astrophysicist who'd been quietly blacklisted after publishing papers suggesting the universe showed signs of being a computational simulation. A refugee from Syria who'd survived chemical weapons attacks and seen how quickly international powers could mobilize when they wanted to, and how completely they ignored atrocities when intervention wasn't convenient. Each of them had experienced something that broke their faith in the official narrative of reality. Each of them recognized that the comfortable stories people told themselves about the world were lies designed to keep them docile. And each of them, when I shared carefully chosen pieces of what the Gray had told me, understood immediately that I was describing something real. But 47 people in a year. At that rate, I'd need 85 years to find 4,000. And I only had 4 more years until December 2028 when 3i Atlas returned. The math didn't work. I couldn't do this alone, meeting people one at a time, carefully building trust over months before revealing anything substantial. I needed to scale. I needed to reach thousands of people simultaneously and let them self-select based on whether the information resonated or repelled them. I needed to put the truth out there, not in a way that would get me immediately disappeared by the 40 and their security apparatus, but in a way that would sound crazy enough to be dismissed by believers and true enough to be recognized by the faith dead. That's why I'm recording this. That's why I'm putting it online under multiple anonymous accounts, posting it to forums and video platforms and anywhere else people gather to discuss conspiracies and alternative theories about reality. Because I can't find 4,000 people in 4 years through individual conversations. But I can tell the story. I can share what the Gray told me, and I can let the people who need to hear it find their way to it. Most people who encounter this recording will dismiss it immediately. They'll call it creative fiction or mental illness or an elaborate hoax. They'll analyze the details and find inconsistencies because I've deliberately left some information vague and changed some identifying details to protect myself and my sources. They'll decide it's entertainment or propaganda or the work of someone who needs psychiatric help. And that's fine. That's actually ideal. Because the more this looks like just another conspiracy theory video, just another story someone made up for attention or profit, the less likely the 40 are to take it seriously and expend resources shutting it down. But some people, a small percentage, but some, they'll listen to this and something will click. Some pattern of recognition will fire in their brains. Some sense that what I'm describing matches their own observations and experiences will make them pay attention in a way they can't quite explain. Those are the ones I'm looking for. Those are the ones who might be part of the 4,000. And if enough of them find this message, if enough of them reach out and connect and start talking to each other, maybe we can build something. Maybe we can create that unknown variable the Gray talked about. Maybe we can find a response to 2029 that doesn't fit the patterns the architect has seen for 4 billion years. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not asking you to take any of this on faith, ironically enough, given that the whole point is about people who've stopped having faith. I'm asking you to consider whether the world you see around you makes sense, whether the official explanations for things have ever felt complete and satisfying, or whether there's always been something slightly off that you couldn't quite articulate. I'm asking whether you've experienced something that broke your ability to accept comfortable lies, trauma, loss, horror, injustice, something that permanently changed how you see reality and made it impossible to go back to believing the cheerful stories people tell themselves. And if you have experienced that, if you are one of the faith dead who can hear difficult truths without breaking, then I'm asking you to consider that maybe this isn't fiction. Maybe this is someone trying to warn you about what's coming. Maybe this is your chance to be part of something that might, however impossibly, make a difference when the deadline arrives. It's October 2024 as I'm recording this. That gives us 4 years and 2 months until December 2028, when 3i Atlas returns. 4 years to find each other, build networks, develop responses, prepare for a choice that most of humanity doesn't even know they'll have to make. 4 years to figure out if there's a third option beyond integration and reset. 4 years to maybe, possibly, introduce enough chaos into a system that's been running unchanged for 4 billion years that something genuinely new becomes possible. The Gray died believing that was worth attempting, even though the odds were astronomical. It crashed deliberately, volunteered for termination, shared everything it knew just to give us this chance. I waved goodbye to a being that sacrificed itself to warn us, and I meant that wave as a promise that I'd try, that I'd find the others, that I wouldn't let the information die with it. So here I am, keeping that promise by recording this message and sending it out into the digital void, hoping it finds the people who need to hear it. If you made it this far, if you watched or listened to this entire thing and it didn't sound completely insane, you might be one of them. You might be one of the 4,000 people on this planet whose psychology makes you capable of hearing that humanity faces extinction or enslavement in 2029 and staying functional enough to do something about it. I can't prove any of what I've told you. The Gray couldn't prove it either when it talked to me. That's not how this works. This isn't about evidence or verification or convincing skeptics. This is about recognition, about people who've already lost their comfortable illusions recognizing truth when they hear it, even when that truth is terrible. So, I'm going to ask you to do something. Not for me, for yourself, and for the others like you who are out there searching for confirmation that they're not alone in seeing through the lies. If this resonated with you, if something in what I described matched your own sense that reality isn't what we're told it is, if you're one of the faith dead who can handle uncomfortable truth, then leave a comment. Don't tell me where you're from. Don't give away identifying information that could be used to track you. Just leave one word: awake. That's it. Just that one word. Awake. Let's see how many of us there are. Let's see if we can find each other in the noise and chaos of the internet. Let's see if maybe, just maybe, there are enough of us to build something the architect didn't anticipate. 4 years and 2 months. That's what we have. The clock is counting down whether we acknowledge it or not. 3i Atlas is returning. The assembly is watching. The architect is evaluating whether humanity gets integrated, harvested, or reset. And somewhere out there, approximately 4,000 people exist who might be psychologically capable of hearing this truth and choosing to fight back, instead of accepting one of the options we've been given. I'm betting you're one of them.
I'm betting that if you made it this far, if you're still listening, if you're considering leaving that comment, you're someone who stopped believing in God not because you chose atheism, but because reality forced you to see that the comfortable stories were lies. You're someone who's already been broken and rebuilt. Someone who has nothing left to lose because you've already lost the illusions that most people need to function. Someone who might be willing to risk what's left on an impossible gamble. So here's my ask. Leave the comment. Just one word. Awake. And then start looking. Start noticing the patterns I described. Start identifying other people who've experienced faith death. Start building connections outside official channels, outside institutional frameworks, outside anything that can be easily monitored or shut down. Start preparing for December 2028 when 3i Atlas returns and humanity faces the deadline. And start thinking about what 1,000 people with nothing to lose and no faith in authority might accomplish if they coordinate effectively. Because that's the unknown variable. That's the possibility the assembly hasn't simulated. That's the hope, however faint, that the gray died to give us. 4 years, 2 months, and counting. The universe is not what you think it is. God is not what you think it is. And humanity is running out of time to figure out what we actually are and what we're going to do about it. Welcome to the truth. Welcome to the knowledge that will either save us or drive us insane. Welcome to the network of the faith dead who refuse to accept extinction or enslavement as our only options. Comment below. Just one word. Awake. Let's find each other. Let's see how many of us there are. And let's see if we can do the impossible one more time. Because we're humans. Being impossible is what we were engineered to do. And maybe, just maybe, we can use that design against the designers. Maybe we can be so impossibly, unpredictably, chaotically human that we break a system that's been running for 4 billion years. Or maybe we can't. Maybe the reset is inevitable and this is all just noise before the silence. But at least we'll have tried. At least someone will have waved goodbye to a dying alien who believed we were worth saving and meant it as a promise to fight. At least the truth will have been told, recorded, preserved for whoever comes after us. That's all I can offer. That's all the gray could offer. The rest is up to you. If this video disappears, if I disappear, if you come back and find this has been deleted or my account has been terminated, that tells you something, doesn't it? That tells you it wasn't just a story, that someone took it seriously enough to silence it. Save this, share this, make copies, get it to people who need to hear it. Don't let the information die just because they kill the messenger. The truth is bigger than me, bigger than any one person. The truth is that we have 4 years left to make a choice we don't understand about a future we can't imagine. And the only way we survive, the only way we stay human instead of becoming harvested consciousness in some alien battery farm, is if enough of us wake up and refuse to accept the options we've been given. Comment below. One word, awake. I'll be watching, and so will the others you'll help me find.